Hello there, and welcome to All About Earth, where science drifts gently with imagination, and the past feels close enough to touch. Wherever you are right now, perhaps nestled under a blanket, or stretched across a sofa, or lying beneath a sky scattered with stars, thank you for joining me. Take a deep breath. Let the day fall away. Tonight, we're going somewhere unexpected. Picture the Sahara. Endless dunes, shimmering heat, silence that hums. Now, erase it. Because 100 million years ago, this was no desert at all. Back in the Cretaceous, the Sahara was a living tapestry of rivers, deltas, and swamps. Twisting through forests that breathed thick, wet air, it was a green labyrinth where fish, the size of cars, stirred the shallows and the air buzzed with the pulse of insects and amphibians. If you stood there then, the soundscape would be alive. Croaks, splashes, the slow drag of something enormous moving through water. And there, reigning over it all, was a creature both strange and magnificent. Spinosaurus, long-snouted, crocodile-like, but walking on land, part fish hunter, part mystery. Its sail rose above the reeds, like a ship's mast. It was the emblem of this lost world, a predator designed for the waterways of a vanished Sahara. Can you imagine it? A river glinting in the late Cretaceous sun, the surface trembling as Spinosaurus slips beneath, silent as an oar through silk. You can almost hear the hiss of the reeds, the distant thunder of wings. Tonight, we're going to wander back through time, following the faint ripple of those ancient channels. We won't dig into the science just yet. That's for later. For now, just let your mind drift along those warm, ancient waters. Wherever you're listening from, your bed, your couch, or perhaps outdoors under a blanket of stars. Take a moment to picture that transformation, the Sahara as a rainforest, the desert as a delta. What would it feel like to stand there, barefoot on that soft, wet earth, surrounded by life that has since turned to dust? As we explore this lost world together, I'd love to know what you see in your mind's eye. A ripple? A sail? The echo of wings? Share your thoughts. Leave a like if this kind of slow, curious dreaming speaks to you. And subscribe if you'd like to keep traveling through time with us. For now, close your eyes. The desert is gone. The air smells of rain. And somewhere out there, in the twilight of deep time, the rivers of the Cretaceous are still flowing, quietly waiting to be remembered. The Cretaceous Earth was a furnace wearing a crown of clouds. Imagine a planet turned up 10 degrees warmer than ours. Oceans steaming, forests stretching to the poles, and no ice anywhere, not even a sparkle at the tips of the world. The Cretaceous didn't do cold. It was a greenhouse planet, lush, humid, and gloriously overgrown, as if the Earth itself had discovered a newfound appetite for life and was determined to feed it with heat. Let's start with the air, the great invisible engine of everything. Carbon dioxide levels were sky high, roughly 4 times what they are today. That extra greenhouse gas wrapped the planet in a soft, heavy blanket of warmth. The average global temperature hovered around 27 degrees, about 10 degrees warmer than the modern world. It wasn't just the equator that baked. The poles, those regions we think of as eternal ice, were mild and wet, shaded by forests of towering conifers and fern canopies. The Arctic, instead of white silence, was green and alive. Antarctica, still joined at times to Australia, was a temperate woodland where rain fell instead of snow. The world was tropical from top to bottom. Without polar ice caps, the oceans swelled. Sea levels rose by nearly 200 meters, flooding continental margins and turning lowlands into shallow seas. North America became a chain of islands wrapped around an inland ocean. Europe was a jigsaw of archipelagos. South America and Africa, still slowly saying their goodbyes to Gondwana, were rimmed with long, drowned coasts. The planet was, in a literal sense, smaller, less land to stand on, more ocean to cradle the heat. And oh, the heat moved. Ocean currents, unblocked by polar ice, circulated freely, spreading warmth evenly across the globe. The deep sea, now a sluggish soup of oxygen-poor water, stored this heat like a memory. The surface shimmered under skies thick with moisture. It was the kind of world where thunderstorms were daily theatre, and humidity was not a suggestion but a law. Step outside anywhere, and the air would cling to you like a wet shirt. The Cretaceous atmosphere was alive with weather. This was the age when Africa began to drift, inching away from the supercontinent Gondwana, like a leaf breaking loose from a branch. Imagine it, the Earth's crust restless beneath the surface, shuddering and splitting as rifts opened across what is now the Sahara and the Congo Basin. The Atlantic Ocean was being born, a newborn sea widening by millimeters each year, but with the slow persistence of eternity. Tectonic plates, those vast stone rafts beneath our feet, were rearranging themselves for a new map. As Africa pulled away, the world's climate shifted even more. The rising mid-ocean ridges spewed volcanic gases into the sky. Carbon dioxide, water vapor, sulfur. Each eruption was a puff in the great planetary furnace, a reminder that the Earth is and has always been an artist who paints with fire. Volcanoes lined the margins of continents like glowing necklaces, feeding the air with minerals and warmth. The Cretaceous Earth exhaled steam and smelled faintly of brimstone. Now picture the Sahara again, not the golden desert of our time, but its ghost from deep time's memory, where there is now dust and silence. There once were monsoons. Seasonal rain swept in waves across what would one day become North Africa. Rivers burst from the highlands, flooding deltas, feeding lakes that shimmered like emeralds under the sun. This was the wet heart of the continent, a tropical floodplain where clouds gathered each afternoon in enormous slow-motion towers of vapor. Lightning flashed. The Earth's pulse was water. Rainfall patterns in the Cretaceous were governed by warmth itself. With higher global temperatures, evaporation skyrocketed. The air was thick with vapor, and what went up inevitably came down. The monsoon cycles that drenched Cretaceous Africa would have made today's tropical storms look modest. It was not a gentle drizzle, but a symphony of downpours, entire afternoons swallowed by rain. Rivers overflowed their banks again and again, leaving behind layers of silt and life, carving channels that gleamed in the sun. The Sahara was, for tens of millions of years, a place of lakes, wetlands and forests, a far cry from the parched silence it would become. But while rain shaped the surface, plants rewrote the sky. The Cretaceous was the age of green ambition. Ferns, cycads and conifers had already ruled for ages, covering continents in deep, feathery forests. But somewhere, quietly, a revolution was brewing. The first flowering plants, they appeared modestly at first, small blossoms tucked among leaves, perhaps unnoticed by the giant reptiles stomping nearby. Yet these early flowers were the future. With them came seeds wrapped in fruit, pollination aided by wind and insects, and colors that the world had never seen before. Imagine that moment in planetary time, the first petals unfurling, the first fragrance drifting through the humid air. Evolution, after billions of years of patience, suddenly discovered perfume. The Earth, it seemed, was experimenting with beauty. If the Cretaceous could speak, it might have whispered, "Bloom." These new plants, angiosperms as scientists call them, spread like rumors through the ecosystem. They were faster growing, more adaptable, and quick to take advantage of the warmth and moisture. Soon, the Cretaceous landscape was a lush mosaic. Ferns, still waving in the shadows, but now joined by flowering shrubs and the earliest fruit-bearing trees. Pollinators, those tiny engineers of life, began to co-evolve, buzzing and flitting from petal to petal. The planet was not just warm, it was alive in technicolor. And beneath all this beauty, the machinery of the planet kept humming. Plate tectonics continued to reshape the continents. South America drifted west, prying open the South Atlantic like a slow-moving zipper. India, restless as ever, began its northward sprint toward Asia, a journey that would take tens of millions of years and end in the crash that raised the Himalayas. Australia and Antarctica, still bound together, began to tilt southward, bathed in long days of polar sunlight. Every few million years the map shifted a little more, but the warmth held steady, as if the planet itself refused to cool. This heat had consequences beyond comfort. The warm oceans, layered and still, often lacked oxygen. In some places, vast regions of the seabed turned anoxic, dead zones where nothing could breathe. The sediments that built up there were dark, rich with carbon, and would one day harden into oil shale and black rock. Even now, deep beneath the Sahara's sands, these old seas sleep, holding the memory of a wetter, wilder Earth in their buried layers. Still, despite its smothering warmth, the Cretaceous was not an inferno. Life thrived in abundance precisely because the planet was so stable. The high sea levels created countless shallow marine habitats. Warm rain-fed jungles and swamp. The atmosphere, though thick, was breathable and generous, rich in oxygen compared to earlier ages. To step into the Cretaceous would be to feel the world breathing faster, heavier, but full of promise. It was, in every sense, Earth's long tropical afternoon, a time when evolution lounged comfortably in the heat, inventing new forms of life and color. The continents were still drifting apart, but the world felt unified by climate. There were no polar deserts, no ice ages waiting around the corner. Instead, the entire planet seemed to shimmer under a steady sun, as if caught in an endless summer. If you could look down from orbit, the Cretaceous Earth would appear greener and bluer than ours, the continents smaller, their edges feathered with shallow seas. Clouds would spiral thickly across the equator, streaking over oceans alive with plankton blooms. You might see massive storms rolling across the proto-Atlantic, their shadows chasing across Africa's river-laced surface. It would be a beautiful planet, brighter, warmer, wetter, perhaps the most fertile the Earth has ever been. And yet, beneath that vibrant surface, time was at work, quietly preparing for change. Every greenhouse eventually cools. Every paradise eventually shifts. The Cretaceous warmth would not last forever. Over millions of years, the slow drift of continents would alter ocean currents, volcanoes would pulse and fade, and the delicate balance of carbon and oxygen would begin to shift once more. But in this chapter of Earth's story, there was no hint of that yet. The planet was content, luxuriating in its own heat, humming with chlorophyll and thunder. If you stood on a Cretaceous hilltop and looked out over the landscape, you'd see continents in mid-transformation, mountains crumbling into rivers, valleys filling with lakes. The air hazy with pollen and mist. You might squint toward the horizon and see, far to the west, the first glimmer of a widening ocean, an Atlantic just beginning to stretch. The land beneath your feet would tremble occasionally, a reminder that Africa was on the move. But mostly you'd hear water and wind, you'd smell rain and resin. You'd feel the heat of a world that had never heard of winter. This was the greenhouse Earth, radiant and alive. A planet with no polar caps, no frozen silence, only the rhythm of rain and the pulse of warm oceans. It was a time when continents drifted apart like lazy rafts, when flowers dared to bloom for the first time, and when the Sahara, the future world of sand and stone, was still a wet cradle of life. The Cretaceous wasn't just another chapter in Earth's history. It was a love letter written in sunlight and carbon, in thunder and blue, a reminder that our planet has worn many faces, cold and hot, barren and lush, and that even in its wildest moods, it always finds a way to make beauty out of chaos. So if tonight you feel the warmth of your blanket or the hum of the air around you, think of that ancient heat still whispering through the ages. The Earth remembers. The Sahara remembers. And somewhere deep in the strata of stone, the story of the Cretaceous still glows, like embers under sand, waiting for us to listen. The rivers of the Cretaceous Sahara did not merely flow, they roared. They meandered, and sprawled across the land like living veins, glittering beneath a sky thick with warmth and mist. These weren't the timid, seasonal trickles we know today. No, these were true prehistoric titans, wide as highways, deep as dreams, and alive with motion. From the high plateaus of Central Africa, great channels wound their way northward, splitting into deltas, lagoons and oxbow lakes that shimmered in the sun like fragments of broken mirrors. Each rainy season, the monsoon clouds gathered and burst open, and the rivers rose until they spilled far beyond their banks. Floodplains vanished under sheets of water. Trees stood like islands in a moving sea. When the waters retreated, they left behind thick blankets of silt, a gift of nutrients that turned the region into a paradise for anything that could swim, crawl, slither, or fly. It was a world sculpted by rhythm, flood, retreat, bloom, repeat. If you could drift down one of those ancient rivers, say on a raft of tangled reeds, you'd be entering a landscape equal parts chaos and grace. The main channel twisted and curved lazily through forests of towering ferns and flowering shrubs. Smaller tributaries branched away, curling into lagoons and oxbow lakes, crescent-shaped pools left behind when old river bends were cut off from the flow. Their surfaces shimmered with insects, their edges thick with reeds and glossy leaves. The air smelled of wet vegetation and iron-rich mud. Every few minutes something large would surface with a splash, then vanish again into the murk. This was not a quiet place. The Cretaceous rivers of the Sahara were alive with sound, croaks, splashes, hisses, bellows. If the modern African savanna is an orchestra of hooves and roars, the Cretaceous floodplain was a symphony of water. The river itself was a feast. Beneath its surface swam fish that could make a small boat nervous. Enormous sawfish with snouts bristling like jagged swords glided through the current. Lungfish buried themselves in the mud during the dry spells, waiting months for the rains to return. And then there were the true heavyweights, coelacanths, the size of sharks, armored gaz with jaws like bear traps, and the giants known as morsonia, freshwater fish that could grow longer than a human is tall, their scales thick as coins and glinting bronze in the light. Predators followed the fish, of course, and few rivers in the history of Earth have hosted such a terrifying cast. Crocodiles, or rather, their distant and oversized relatives, were everywhere. Some species stretched nearly 12 meters long, their armored backs rising above the water like driftwood until they lunged. Imagine a crocodile the length of a city bus, jaws snapping with enough force to break bone and crush shell. The largest, Sarcosuchus imperator, earned the nickname Super Croc, and it deserved every syllable. It could weigh 8 tons, its skull alone the size of a person. When it basked on the riverbank, even the dinosaurs gave it space. But despite the danger, life flourished. Herds of herbivorous dinosaurs moved through the floodplain in slow, thunderous processions, following the water like migrating elephants today. Broad-backed sauropods, their necks arching like cranes, grazed on the high branches of conifer trees that lined the river. Their heavy feet sank deep into the soft soil, leaving prints that would fossilize into story. Chadrasaurs, the duck-billed grazers, foraged near the water's edge, scooping up ferns and aquatic plants with their shovel-like mouths. They came in groups, safety in numbers, lowing softly as they crossed the shallow. The air above the river belonged to a different kingdom altogether. Pterosaurs, the great flying reptiles, soared and circled like seabirds, their wings spanning 5, 6, even 10 meters. Some dived for fish, skimming the surface with graceful precision. Others perched on sandbars, squabbling noisily over scraps. Their cries echoed across the water, a mix of gull and nightmare. When the sun caught their wings just right, they glowed like bronze kites against the endless blue. And then there were the smaller flyers, insect-eaters darting between the reeds, their leathery wings flickering like paper in the breeze. Dragonflies the size of dinner plates hovered over the pools, their multifaceted eyes flashing green and gold. If you sat very still on the bank, you might feel the wind from a pterosaur's wings as it swept overhead, a living shadow against the light. At the water's surface, the struggle never stopped. Fish hunted insects, crocodiles hunted fish, and occasionally the river itself seemed to take part, sweeping the unlucky away in its muddy embrace. The floodplains were a perpetual banquet, and every creature knew both sides of the menu, predator and prey, hunter and hunted. In the backwaters and oxbow lakes, the scene changed again. Here the current slowed, and the water turned warm and still, perfect for amphibians and smaller reptiles. Turtles the size of coffee tables sunned themselves on logs. Frogs croaked in chorus, their calls echoing like drums. Snakes slithered between the roots, some aquatic, some arboreal, all part of this steamy tangle of life. Occasionally, something massive would wade in, perhaps a long-necked herbivore seeking a drink or a cooling bath. The water rippled around its legs. Birds, or at least the earliest versions of them, flitted through the branches, snatching insects mid-air. Some of these proto-birds still had teeth, a reminder that flight had only recently evolved. Their feathers, bright and iridescent, caught the sunlight as they darted and called. It's easy to imagine the scene as idyllic, a prehistoric Eden, But the Cretaceous rivers were no paradise for the faint-hearted. This was a competitive masterpiece of nature, where survival required cunning and speed. Even the plants played their part in the arms race. The new flowering species along the riverbanks grew quickly, spreading wherever the floods left fresh soil. Ferns and cycads competed for light, while towering conifers shed their needles into the water, feeding entire chains of decomposers below. Algae and microscopic plankton bloomed in the nutrient-rich shallows, painting the water green and feeding schools of filter-feeding fish. The delta regions, where the rivers met the sea, were perhaps the most dynamic of all. Here, fresh water mixed with salt, creating brackish lagoons teeming with life. Schools of fish migrated between river and ocean. Crustaceans burrowed into the mud. The tide itself was a sculptor, reshaping channels and building new sandbars with every rise and fall. The smell of decay and salt hung in the air, the smell of abundance. And yet, even in this richness, danger was never far. The crocodiles ruled the shallows, but deeper still lurked other hunters, sleek marine reptiles drifting inland with the tide, opportunists who followed the scent of prey. Imagine the sudden chaos when river and sea predators met in the delta, teeth against teeth, scales flashing, water erupting in foam and blood. It was not a place for hesitation. Overhead, pterosaurs circled, waiting for leftovers. On the shore, smaller dinosaurs scavenged the remains, their beaks clicking as they tore at carcasses. Life here recycled itself constantly. Nothing was wasted. And when the flood season returned, as it always did, the entire system reset. Water surged over the plains, sweeping away nests, carcasses and fallen trees. Fish scattered into new channels. Sediment buried old layers of life. Within weeks, greenery would surge back, flowers blooming where corpses had lain. The rivers erased and rewrote their own stories every year. What's remarkable is how stable it all was. Despite the chaos, the Cretaceous rivers were ancient machines, their cycles of flood and drought finely tuned to the climate. Even as continents drifted and volcanoes erupted far away, these waterways kept beating like a steady heart across the Sahara. They nourished the land, shaped the terrain, and dictated where life could thrive. To step into that world would be to feel utterly small. The air would shimmer with heat, thick with moisture and buzzing life. The ground would squish beneath your feet, alive with insects and the hidden shuffle of creatures unseen. Every rustle in the reeds would make your pulse quicken. Every ripple in the water would whisper the same warning. Don't wade too deep. Because in those rivers, the hierarchy was inverted. The land animals watched the water's edge with fear. The real power lay below the surface. The Sahara of the Cretaceous was a playground for giants and a proving ground for survivors. Everything that lived there had to be built for extremes, the floods, the heat, the predators, but for all its danger, it was also breathtakingly fertile. The floodplains shimmered with new growth after every monsoon, painting the land in endless shades of green. Standing at the edge of one of those ancient channels, you might have felt the planet's pulse. The river would breathe around you, slow and heavy, its currents carrying the scent of life and decay in equal measure. The sky above would be streaked with the silhouettes of flying reptiles, the air thick with pollen and humidity. Every sound, every motion, every droplet of water spoke the same truth. This was Earth at its most exuberant, wild, wet, and gloriously alive. In those ancient rivers, time itself seemed to move differently. Each bend held the memory of floods gone by, each layer of mud a record of vanished lives, and as the currents wound through the heart of a green Sahara, they carried with them the story of an age when water ruled and land merely followed. It was a world that shimmered, thundered, and breathed, a world that whispered, "Swim if you dare," because in the rivers of the Cretaceous Sahara, the rules were rewritten. The mightiest hunters walked on land, but the true masters waited beneath the surface. And if you listened closely, beneath the roar of the current, you could almost hear the earth itself chuckle softly, as if to say, "Welcome to the River Kingdom. Watch your step." If you could travel back to the Cretaceous Sahara and stand beside one of its great rivers, the first thing you'd notice would not be the heat or the thick humming air or even the distant thunder of storms. It would be the silence, that strange, heavy silence that comes before something breaks the surface. And then, with a sound like a ship rising from the deep, it would appear Spinosaurus, a name that still makes paleontologists grin like children and shiver like field researchers standing too close to the edge of the unknown. The spine lizard, 15 meters of muscle, bone, and prehistoric absurdity. Longer than a tinge, heavier than an elephant herd's worth of bone, and shaped like no other predator before or since. If dinosaurs were the Earth's experiments in evolution, Spinosaurus was the one where nature threw out the rulebook and scribbled amphibious dragon, possibly insane, in the margins. Picture it, a creature stretching half the length of a tennis court, its back crowned with a towering sail, a row of spines as long as a human is tall, sheathed in skin that caught the light like rippling silk. Some say the sail was for display, a flag of dominance. Others think it was a thermal radiator, a living solar panel. Whatever its purpose, it made Spinosaurus look like the world's most dangerous yacht. When it moved through the shallows, the sail cut through the sunlight and shimmered across the water's surface, a warning and a wonder all at once. Its head alone could swallow a person whole, long and narrow, shaped like a crocodile's. The skull stretched over 1.5 meters, a spear built for water. Dozens of conical teeth lined its jaws, not the serrated blades of a T-Rex, but smooth, sharp stakes, made for gripping, not slicing, perfect for catching slippery prey. Inside that elongated snout were pressure sensors, tiny pits that could detect vibrations in the water. A fish twitched a fin, a ripple formed, and Spinosaurus knew. It didn't just see its prey, it felt it. This was a hunter that didn't need to chase. It could wait, patient and motionless, until the river itself gave away the secret of where dinner was hiding. Its neck arched forward like the boom of a crane, leading to a torso built for both strength and buoyancy. The ribs flared wide, forming a barrel chest that held enormous lungs, perfect for holding breath during dives or bursts of swimming. And those forelimbs, thick, muscular, ending in curved claws the size of scythes, once thought to be used for slashing, they likely served as grappling tools, for hauling prey, or perhaps for clambering up muddy banks, but the legs told the stranger story. Unlike the towering, earth-shaking limbs of T-Rex or Giganotosaurus, Spinosaurus had shorter, stockier legs. For decades, this puzzled scientists. A giant predator with short legs? It seemed almost comical, like a lion wearing diving fins. Yet, those legs held the secret to Spinosaurus's kingdom. They were not built for running, but for swimming. Recent discoveries revealed that its hind limbs were flattened, paddle-like, capable of powerful strokes through water. The tail, too, was later found to be flexible and deep, shaped like the fin and newt or a crocodile's, a perfect rudder. This was no land tyrant pretending to swim. This was a true semi-aquatic predator, perhaps the only dinosaur to fully conquer both realms, land and river alike. The Cretaceous Sahara belonged to Spinosaurus the way the modern Nile belongs to the crocodile. Now, imagine watching it hunt. The river is calm, its surface broken only by a few drifting leaves. Beneath, shadows move, fish the size of men, gliding lazily through the warm, murky current. The water begins to churn, a faint ripple, then another, and suddenly the surface explodes. A massive snout bursts upward, teeth flashing, droplets flying like silver shrapnel. In one swift motion, the fish disappears, caught between jaws that clamp shut with the certainty of gravity. Spinosaurus tilts its head back, swallows, and then just as silently sinks again into the deep. The water closes behind it, smooth as glass. It hunted with elegance, not rage. While most predators relied on speed or brute force, Spinosaurus was an ambush artist. It could submerge its body almost completely, keeping only its nostrils above the surface, the sail barely visible like the dorsal fin of a monstrous shark. When prey strayed too close, those massive forelimbs would surge forward, the tail flicking like a whip, propelling it into a deadly lunge. The prey had no chance. And here's the part that makes scientists grin. Spinosaurus may have walked through its hunting grounds as much as it swam, its dense bones, heavy and compact like those of a penguin or hippo, acted as ballast. On land, that weight might have been a burden. In water, it was perfection, keeping the animal steady and submerged, letting it glide without bobbing to the surface. Each step through the shallows would have sent mud swirling around its feet like smoke. If evolution could laugh, Spinosaurus was its joke on terrestrial pride, where other predators grew tall and fast to dominate the plains. This one said, "No thank you," and dove straight into the river. It traded speed for stealth, land for depth, and became the king of an element most dinosaurs barely dared to touch. Scientists used to picture dinosaurs as stiff and earthbound, bound by bone and gravity. But Spinosaurus rewrote that script entirely. It didn't just wade into the water, it belonged there. Its entire anatomy reads like a manual for aquatic living. Nostrils set high on the snout, tail fin for propulsion, conical teeth for gripping fish, dense bones for submersion, paddle-like feet for steering. Even its pelvis shows signs of compromise, less suited for upright walking, more for horizontal swimming. But what about that sail? That magnificent and baffling sail? It wasn't there by accident. The spines that formed it rose nearly 2 meters high, each anchored deep into the vertebrae. One theory suggests that blood vessels ran through the sail, allowing it to act like a radiator, soaking up heat during cool mornings, then releasing it in the afternoon sun. Another possibility: the sail was a billboard, a visual declaration, a way to say to any rival Spinosaurus drifting nearby, "This river's taken." Or perhaps it was a love letter, a display for mates, an aquatic peacock's fan. Whatever its purpose, it gave Spinosaurus an unmistakable silhouette. If you were a fish glancing up through the water's shimmer, you might see the faint shadow of that sail passing overhead and think, too late, that the clouds had changed shape. The world of the Cretaceous Sahara offered no shortage of challenges. The floods came and went. The riverbanks shifted. Sometimes droughts shrank the waterways to muddy ribbons, forcing even aquatic hunters to trudge through cracked riverbeds in search of deeper pools. But Spinosaurus was built for resilience. It could haul itself across the mud, belly dragging, claws gripping like oars. And when the rains returned, it slid back into the refilled channels with the satisfaction of a creature perfectly at home. For such a colossal predator, Spinosaurus seems to have been surprisingly specialized. It was not a generalist like many other carnivores. Its anatomy says it plain. This was a fish-eater, a giant whose empire was built on scales and fins. It didn't chase herds or stalk forests. It patrolled the waterways. Its world was one of currents and reflections, of patience and precision. And that specialization is what makes it both fascinating and fragile. Evolution gave it everything it needed to rule its rivers, and very little to survive beyond them. When climates changed, when seas shifted and ecosystems collapsed, Spinosaurus's reign would end, not with a roar, but with the quiet withdrawal of water. Its body would one day fossilize beneath the sands of the desert that had once been its hunting ground, its bones preserved like the memory of a lost tide. But while it lived, it was unstoppable. There was something almost regal about it, the way it moved, deliberate and slow, as if aware that nothing could challenge it in its domain. Other predators might roar or chase, but Spinosaurus did not need noise. Its presence alone was enough. It was the silent emperor of the Cretaceous rivers, crowned not by teeth or claws, but by adaptation itself. Even today, the fossils of Spinosaurus carry an air of mystery. First discovered in Egypt in the early 1900s, the original skeleton was tragically destroyed during World War II, a cruel twist of fate that left scientists piecing together its story from fragments scattered across North Africa. Each new discovery added a new twist: shorter legs than expected, denser bones, a tail like a paddle. It was as if the creature itself refused to be fully understood, slipping away like it always had, beneath the surface. And yet, through patience and persistence, we've learned to see it more clearly, not as a misfit dinosaur, but as something extraordinary, a pioneer, the first giant predator to make water its throne. Picture it again, the final image. Dusk falls over the Cretaceous Sahara. The last light of the sun drips gold across the river. In the shallows, a ripple forms. The sail appears first, black against the dying light, followed by the long snout, the glint of teeth, the slow churn of the tail. For a moment the creature is still, a living statue. Then it moves, smooth as oil, sliding into deeper water until only the sail remains above the surface, cutting through the reflection of the clouds. If the Cretaceous had a king, it didn't roar, it rippled. It didn't run, it swam. Spinosaurus ruled in silence, its power measured not in speed or ferocity, but in grace, precision, and the ancient patience of the river itself. And if you ever find yourself dreaming near the sound of running water, listen closely. Somewhere beneath the steady rush, you might almost hear it. That whisper from a lost world. Dive. Before the age of engines, before sails and ships and stories of leviathans, there were fish. Enormous, armored, unbothered fish, gliding through the slow brown rivers of the Cretaceous Sahara, like living submarines. The water was their kingdom, and in those ancient channels of heat and thunder, none reigned more impressively than Mawsonia, the armored titan of the deep. Picture it, a fish stretching 4 meters long, thick-bodied, slow-moving and completely unafraid. Its scales were not the delicate shimmer of modern fish, but plates, thick, enamel-coated armor, arranged like medieval chainmail. Each one could turn a predator's tooth. Each glint of sunlight off its flanks a warning. If you were unlucky enough to meet one eye to eye underwater, you'd find a creature that looked ancient even by Cretaceous standards, a face that seemed carved from stone, with a mouthful of stubby, conical teeth built not for slicing but for crushing. Mawsonia was no ordinary fish. It was a coelacanth, a lineage so old it made dinosaurs look like newcomers. Its ancestors had swum in the oceans hundreds of millions of years earlier, long before flowers existed, long before birds sang. They were there when continents were still finding their shapes, and yet somehow in the warm Cretaceous rivers of North Africa, they were still here, survivors from another world. If evolution is a race, Mawsonia was the runner who refused to stop. It wasn't sleek, it wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. With a body like a torpedo built from granite and muscle, it could drift through the water with the calm confidence of something that had already beaten time. Its fins, lobe fins, thick and jointed like primitive limbs, moved in slow, alternating beats, giving it the eerie, almost walking motion that coelacanths are famous for. Watching one move was like watching a creature try to remember how to walk underwater. Its rhythm was hypnotic, steady and deliberate, as though the fish were thinking through each motion. Left fin, right fin, tail flick, breathe. Well, whatever passed for breathing in a gill-covered juggernaut. Mawsonia's head was massive, its skull reinforced like a helmet. Inside, the brain case was curiously small compared to its body, a reminder that brawn, not brilliance, ruled the rivers. But in fairness, when you're built like a tank and weigh as much as a small car, quick thinking is optional. Its brain didn't need to strategize. The body itself was a plan, an evolutionary blueprint for survival. Its jaw opened with deliberate power, not the snapping reflex of modern predators. When Mawsonia bit, it bit like a machine. Slow, certain, unstoppable. It crushed mollusks, turtles, and unlucky smaller fish. Anything with a soft shell or careless timing became part of its diet. The sound of those jaws closing underwater would have been like a muffled clap, brief, final, and absolutely unambiguous. Despite its size, Mawsonia wasn't a reckless hunter. It didn't chase. It didn't lunge. It waited, hovering just above the riverbed, camouflaged by silt and shadow. Its scales blended with the light of the murky water, its movement so slow that even the sediment barely stirred. Then, when prey drifted close, a quick dart of muscle, a sudden vacuum of water, and gone, the river's silence restored, the silt settling again like nothing had happened. The ancient deltas of North Africa were perfect for such giants. The warm, oxygen-poor waters of the Cretaceous rivers might have suffocated smaller, delicate fish, but for Mawsonia, they were paradise. Its physiology, refined over eons, let it thrive where others gasped. Its blood carried oxygen efficiently, and its metabolism was slow, almost lazy, a perfect adaptation to a world where the air shimmered with heat and the rivers ran thick with life. Its habitat stretched from the deep bends of major rivers to the calmer lagoons of the deltas. It could move between freshwater and brackish water with ease, a master of both inland and coastal domains. When floods came, carrying new nutrients and prey, Mawsonia followed the rising currents into the plains. When the dry season shrank the rivers, it retreated into deeper channels, waiting, patient as stone, for the rains to return. This patience made it both hunter and survivor. There was no need for speed when time itself was your ally. Some scientists think coelacanths like Mawsonia might have lived for decades, even centuries, slow-growing, slow-aging, ancient souls in scaly armor. Imagine the wisdom of a fish that had watched rivers change course, watched forests rise and fall, and kept swimming, unbothered. The tail was its engine, a powerful traled structure, unlike anything on modern fish. It moved in sweeping, graceful arcs, giving the animal both propulsion and control. It could turn with surprising agility for something so large, its movement fluid but heavy, like a submarine performing a slow pirouette. Watching it move would have been mesmerizing, the kind of silent power that makes you forget to breathe. Its most striking feature, though, was its armor of scales. They were coated with a substance called cosmine, a glossy enamel-like material that caught the light and reflected it like bronze. Each scale was edged and interlocked with the next, forming a nearly impenetrable suit. If a predator tried to bite, it often found only frustration, the sensation of gnawing on polished rock. The scales were both shield and signature, proof that Mawsonia's design was not for elegance, but for endurance, and it worked. The fossil record shows that these fish were among the most widespread and persistent creatures of their age. From the river systems of Africa to the shallow seas of South America, their bones mark the pathways of ancient waterways, a trail of survival across millions of years. They were, in every sense, global citizens of prehistory, slow-moving ambassadors of deep time. But even giants have enemies. And for all its armor, Mawsonia was not invincible. Its sheer size and slow speed made it a tempting target for anything larger or hungrier. When danger approached, it had few defenses besides its scales and mass. Fleeing was not its style. Endurance was. If attacked, it twisted and thrashed, its thick fins and muscular tail turning the water into chaos. Its goal was not escape, but deterrence, a physical reminder to any attacker that some meals aren't worth the trouble. Still, life in the Cretaceous was a gamble, and even armored fish had bad days. Mawsonia might have ruled the middle of the food chain, but its story was one of balance, predator and prey, hunter and hunted. It devoured the small and wary, but every ripple in the river carried the chance that something larger lurked nearby. The Cretaceous waters didn't promise safety to anyone, not even giants. Yet, what a presence it must have been. Imagine standing on a riverbank 100 million years ago, the sun blazing overhead, when suddenly the surface of the water heaves. A vast, armored back breaks through, scales glistening like molten metal. The air fills with the sound of thrashing fins, a wave of muddy spray, and then silence again. The giant is gone, leaving only a swirl of bubbles and a faint tremor in the water. You might think you'd seen a monster. In truth, you'd just witnessed the ordinary business of a Cretaceous afternoon. Mawsonia and its kin were living contradictions. Ancient yet modern, simple yet sophisticated, slow but unstoppable. Their survival strategy wasn't agility or intelligence, but stubborn perfection. When nature builds something that works, sometimes it just keeps it around. Coelacanths had perfected their design long before mammals dreamed of walking on land. And in the hot, fertile rivers of the Cretaceous, that design still held true. What did it look like up close? Fossil evidence suggests a creature of deep, burnished hues, browns, greens, metallic golds, colors that would blend seamlessly with muddy water and river weed. Its eyes, large and reflective, faced slightly upward, perfect for spotting silhouettes against the surface. Its gills flared like fans when it exhaled, releasing tiny streams of bubbles. Even in stillness, it seemed to pulse with quiet power, like the river itself condensed into flesh and bone. Its reproduction, too, was slow and careful. Unlike modern fish that release thousands of eggs, Mawsonia likely gave birth to live young, each already armored, each ready to fend for itself from birth. There was no room for fragility in this world. Life here started tough, or it didn't start at all. The more you learn about Morsonia, the more it seems less like a fish and more like an idea, an embodiment of endurance. While other creatures evolved into new forms, chasing innovation and risk, Morsonia chose mastery. It refined what it already had, adapting subtly, elegantly, and just enough to survive. It was the biological equivalent of an ancient proverb: if it isn't broken, keep swimming. And it did. For tens of millions of years, Morsonia thrived, gliding through the tropical deltas and winding rivers, basking in the heat of a greenhouse Earth. It didn't chase change. It didn't need to. It was already perfect for its world. Strong, slow, serene. It's tempting to imagine what it felt like to swim beside one, though of course that would be a terrible idea. At 3 or 4 meters long, it could easily outweigh a person. One casual sweep of its tail could send a human tumbling into the silt. Its mouth, though not built for tearing, could still close with bone-crushing force. You wouldn't be lunch, probably, but you'd regret the encounter all the same. As the earth itself might have whispered then, swim fast. And yet, despite its size, there's something oddly gentle about the image of Morsonia. It wasn't a monster, not really. It was an old, quiet thing, moving through its world with the patience of deep time. A reminder that not all giants roar, some simply breathe and wait and outlast. Today, its closest relatives still live, tucked away in the deep oceans near Indonesia and the Comoros Islands, the modern coelacanths, the ghosts of the Cretaceous. They look almost the same as their ancestors, as if 65 million years of evolution have passed them by. When scientists first found them alive in the 20th century, it was like seeing a fossil wake up and blink. Living fossil, they called it, but perhaps that's unfair. Morsonia and its kin were never dead. They were simply too good at surviving for extinction to notice them. So next time you stand near a river or watch the surface of the sea shimmer in the sun, think of the giants that once ruled those waters. Think of scales like armor, tails like engines, jaws like gates. Think of a fish so old that time itself had to work around it. The rivers of the Cretaceous are gone, buried beneath deserts and stone. But the memory of their giants endures. In fossils, in science, and in the quiet persistence of their descendants, the world moves on. Climates change, continents drift, but somewhere in the dark a lobefin still stirs, still swims, still carries the echo of those mighty armored ancestors. And if the earth could speak, really speak, perhaps it would sigh softly and say, "Swim fast, my old friend. The river still remembers you." In the steaming wetlands of the Cretaceous Sahara, silence was rarely empty. It was a waiting kind of silence, the sort that settles before something terrible happens. The river drifted slowly, brown and thick with silt, its surface glinting under the tropical sun. Every now and then, a bubble broke the surface. Nothing alarming, just the breath of the river. But beneath that calm skin, a shape was lurking, long, slow, ancient. It was not a log, though it looked like one. Not driftwood, though it floated with the same lazy patience. It was a predator so perfectly adapted to stillness that even the water forgot it was there. And then, in an instant, it wasn't still at all. Sarcosuchus, the flesh crocodile, a name that sounds like a myth. And yet it was very real and very, very large. If you were to stand beside it, your eyes would trace the length of a city bus, 9, 10, maybe 12 meters from snout to tail. Its back was a fortress of bony plates, ridged and glinting like armor in the sun. Its head alone stretched 2 meters long, wide enough to swallow you whole without even the courtesy of chewing. Its jaws, lined with over 100 teeth, could close with a force strong enough to crush bone, shell, or whatever else the river had the misfortune to deliver. Sarcosuchus wasn't merely a crocodile. It was the idea of a crocodile, turned up to mythic proportions, a prototype for terror, the kind of creature that made the riverbanks nervous. And the strangest thing, it didn't have to move much at all. Sarcosuchus was a master of ambush. It ruled not through speed or cunning, but through patience. The oldest weapon in nature's playbook. The strategy was simple: wait long enough, and everything eventually comes to drink. Its favorite spot was the river's edge, where shade met sunlight, where mud gave way to water, where tracks gathered and disappeared. It would settle there like a half-buried statue, only its nostrils and eyes breaking the surface. The air shimmered, the forest hummed, and Sarcosuchus waited. Its eyes, high on its skull, gave it a panoramic view of the shoreline without ever betraying its bulk. Its nostrils could close tight, sealing out water completely. It could stay submerged for minutes, even hours, conserving oxygen, heart rate slowed to a whisper. The river flowed around it as though it were part of the land itself. And when something living wandered too close, a bird, a mammal, perhaps something larger, there would be no warning. Just the sudden explosion of power, a blur of scales and teeth, and the sound of water folding over itself. The river would boil for a moment, then go still again, only ripples ribboned, spreading outward like a secret being told. Sarcosuchus was an ambush predator perfected over millions of years of refinement. Every inch of its anatomy was built for this one purpose. Its long, broad snout, not as narrow as modern fish-eating crocs, not as short as their land-hunting cousins, was an all-purpose weapon, strong enough to snap bones, sensitive enough to detect vibrations in the water. Inside that jaw was an evolutionary masterpiece, muscles so large they could clamp shut with immense force, yet delicate enough to detect the faintest movement nearby. Scientists estimate that the bite of Sarcosuchus reached over 8 tons of pressure, roughly equivalent to a small car falling on your arm. A grimly impressive number, though perhaps less relevant to its prey, who didn't live long enough to appreciate the physics, unlike its modern relatives, which spend their days basking between ambushes. Sarcosuchus likely lived a more active life. The Cretaceous rivers were unpredictable. Floods, droughts, and shifting currents could turn a calm hunting ground into a death trap overnight. So this giant croc had to move, sometimes crawling from one channel to another, dragging its immense belly across the mud. Fossil trackways suggest that when it walked, it didn't scuttle awkwardly. It moved with the low, slow rhythm of an armored tank. Each step pressed deep, leaving behind footprints the size of dinner plates. Its skin, thick and ridged, gleamed with keratin and mud. Along its back ran rows of osteoderms, bony plates that not only protected it from attack, but helped regulate temperature. Under the sun, the plates absorbed heat. In the shade, they released it, nature's own thermostat, designed for a world that never cooled. Its belly, smoother and lighter, pressed against the riverbed, camouflaged by the murky silt. From above, it was invisible. From below, it was unstoppable. But for all its size, Sarcosuchus wasn't invulnerable. Living large came with costs. It needed vast amounts of food, and food wasn't always abundant. Floods brought prey, droughts took them away. There must have been long, hungry stretches when even a 12-meter predator had to rely on cunning instead of power. It might have scavenged carrion, or lain in wait at shrinking pools where desperate fish and small animals gathered. In those times, patience turned from a tactic to a necessity. Its eyes told the story of that patience. Fossil skulls show large orbital sockets, space for vision sharp enough to pierce glare and shadow alike. Imagine those eyes glinting above the surface, gold or amber under the sunlight, unblinking, expressionless, ancient. If the earth itself had eyes, they might have looked like that. It's easy to think of such a creature as monstrous, but there's a kind of beauty in its simplicity. Sarcosuchus didn't chase, didn't waste energy. It waited, struck, and fed. The purest form of predation. The rivers were filled with motion and noise, but Sarcosuchus embodied the opposite. Silence, stillness, inevitability. It was less an animal than an event. Its tail, thick as a tree trunk, was both engine and weapon. In the water, it propelled the croc forward with astonishing acceleration. On land, it could sweep sideways like a battering ram. One swing could shatter bones. Its limbs, short but immensely strong, helped it push off the riverbed or climb up muddy banks when the water receded. The entire body was an architecture of violence and endurance, sculpted by evolution's long, patient hand. What did it eat? Almost anything foolish enough to be near water. The jaw shape and tooth wear suggest a generalist diet: fish, turtles, small reptiles, and even unlucky land animals that came to drink. Its bite marks found on fossil bones tell a clear story. Sometimes, even large prey disappeared into those jaws. One might imagine a smaller dinosaur venturing for a sip, hearing nothing but the gentle hum of insects, and then gone. No roar, no struggle, just the sound of water closing over history. And yet, for all its power, Sarcosuchus was probably a surprisingly graceful swimmer. Its body tapered toward the tail, perfectly balanced for gliding beneath the surface. It could move silently, using only the tip of its tail to steer, conserving energy for the explosive moment when it mattered. Watching it from above would have been eerie, just a faint shadow sliding under the brown water, a suggestion of movement, then nothing. Modern crocodiles, for all their menace, are almost charming compared to this giant. The largest today might reach 6 meters. Sarcosuchus doubled that. Imagine standing beside a modern croco, terrifying enough, and realizing that its ancient ancestor could have swallowed it like an appetizer. It didn't roar, didn't need to. The mere sight of its head breaking the surface would have been enough to send anything living scrambling for higher ground. And yet, the humor of nature lies in its consistency. Despite the size, the design barely changed. Sarcosuchus looked, in most ways, exactly like its smaller descendants. Evolution had found the formula early and simply scaled it up for the Cretaceous. Why reinvent perfection? The croc body plan worked then, and it still works now. When something can survive 200 million years with only minor adjustments, it's fair to say it got things right. Fossils of Sarcosuchus tell us even more. The bones of its snout are pocked with small openings, pits that house pressure sensors. These could detect ripples in the water, letting the animal see with touch even in the murkiest conditions. A single splash could give away the location, size, and even the movement of potential prey. It was a built-in sonar, a biological radar long before submarines had the idea. The nose at the end of that long snout flared just above the surface, able to stay above water while the rest of the animal remained hidden. Even breathing became a form of camouflage. Every part of its body whispered the same evolutionary command. Wait. In the evenings when the sky glowed copper and the river cooled, Sarcosuchus might have hauled itself onto a sandbank to bask, its massive body glistening with mud. Steam would rise off its back, insects circling the heat. It might have opened its mouth wide, not in aggression but to regulate temperature, letting heat escape through its cavernous jaws. The pose looks terrifying, but it was just biology, not anger. The great jaws that had ended so many lives were also vents for its own survival. There's something almost poetic about that duality, destruction and life wrapped in the same set of teeth. As night fell, the river would turn black, reflecting only the stars. The air would fill with the hum of nocturnal life, and somewhere in the dark, Sarcosuchus would slip silently back into the water, unseen and unhurried. It was a ghost by then, a presence rather than a creature. The current would cradle it, carrying it downstream to new feeding grounds. It didn't need to own the river, it was the river. And though millions of years have passed, though the Sahara is now dry and silent, that old patience lingers in the DNA of every crocodile alive today. Each one carries a whisper of that ancient hunter, the stillness, the power, the patience of a world long gone. If you ever find yourself standing by a river at dusk, and you hear the faint rustle of water behind you, take a step back. Evolution has long memories. The water may be shallow, the crocodiles smaller now, but the instinct is the same. Beneath that calm surface still lies the idea of Sarcosuchus. Waiting, unblinking, eternal. If the earth could speak, it might chuckle softly and say, "Wait long enough, and everything comes to drink." And somewhere in the deep past, that ancient croc would agree, its jaws closing with the soft finality of time itself. The rains have come, the sky darkens over the endless floodplain, and the air grows heavy with the promise of thunder. 1,000 miles of river rise, twist and spill over their banks, turning the land into a mirror of the sky, and somewhere, far out on those shimmering plains, a low vibration begins to tremble through the ground. Not thunder, not water, but footsteps. They come in herds, not in twos or tens, but in hundreds. Great, lumbering caravans of life following the rhythm of the seasons. Long necks, broad backs, tails swaying like metronomes to the beat of the earth. They are not predators or warriors, not rulers in the violent sense. They are the quiet monarchs of plenty, the gardeners of the Cretaceous. Among them walks Tyrannosaurus, the brave lizard, a name far too modest for the sight it must have been. 7, sometimes 8 meters long, from snout to tail, standing chest high to a modern giraffe. Its silhouette rises and falls like a moving dune across the wet horizon. Its back arches into a graceful ridge of elongated spines, forming a low sail or hump along its body, shimmering in the sunlight like the crest of a wave. It is built for both endurance and elegance, a creature halfway between power and poetry. Our Tyrannosaurus lived for the water, though it was no swimmer. It was a dweller of floodplains. Those vast, fertile stretches that came to life each rainy season when the rivers burst their seams. To it the floods were not disasters, but invitations. As the waters spread, they brought new growth, ferns uncoiling, cycads sprouting, the first flowering plants unfolding in the steaming heat. For our Tyrannosaurus it was a feast that moved with the seasons, and so it moved too. Its world was a patchwork of wetlands and shallow lakes, thick with greenery and buzzing with insect clouds. Each year when the monsoon returned and the land grew soft and shining, the herds began their migrations, long, steady treks across the plains, following the scent of fresh vegetation. They moved in loose, coordinated bands, mothers and juveniles together, older adults leading the way with the calm confidence of experience. Their pace was unhurried but constant. They had no predators to outrun, only distance to conquer and time to outlast. Their feet left deep impressions in the soft mud, prints the size of dinner plates. Over millions of years, those prints would fossilize, layer upon layer, until one day they'd be found again, a frozen echo of ancient journeys. But in their own time, the tracks were simply pathways, maps drawn by generations of travelers who never stopped moving. To see them grazing must have been a strangely serene sight. Our Tyrannosaurus fed with methodical grace, sweeping its long neck side to side like a slow pendulum. Its mouth was lined with a battery of leaf-shaped teeth, perfect for shredding ferns, conifer needles, and the tender shoots of new flowering plants, the first of their kind in Earth's history. Each bite was a small act of evolution in motion, the new flora of the Cretaceous meeting the old patience of the herbivores that had waited for it. It wasn't picky either. The floodplain was a buffet, and our Tyrannosaurus was the unbothered diner. Ferns in the shallows, delicious. Cycads in the shade, excellent. A patch of early angiosperms, flowering plants, just beginning their grand debut on Earth's stage. Irresistible, it ate with the calm rhythm of a creature that had mastered abundance. Its large body required enormous amounts of food, but the Cretaceous was generous. In the height of the rainy season, when the rivers swelled and the land turned green to the horizon, the herds could graze endlessly, chewing and walking and chewing, for hours each day. Then, when the waters began to retreat, they would follow the rivers northward, seeking new meadows where the grass never quite dried. Migration was not just instinct, it was memory, passed down through generations, a story written in footsteps and hunger. The body of our Tyrannosaurus was a masterpiece of adaptation. Its long, low back supported that distinctive sail or hump, a ridge of elongated neural spines rising from its vertebrae. Scientists still debate its purpose. Some think it held a fatty hump, like a camel's, storing energy for the dry months when the floodwaters vanished. Others believe it functioned as a thermal regulator, absorbing heat during cool mornings and releasing it under the midday sun. And still others think it might have been for display, a living banner used to attract mates or signal to the herd. Whatever the reason, it made our Tyrannosaurus unforgettable. Imagine a line of them at dawn, silhouettes glowing gold against the mist, their sails rising and falling in unison as they moved across the waterlogged plain. They were not merely grazing animals, they were moving landscape. Its limbs were sturdy but not clumsy, designed for long walks and occasional wades through shallow water. Our Tyrannosaurus could stand on all fours or, when needed, rear up on its hind legs to reach higher foliage. Its hands were broad and flat, tipped with blunt claws that could scrape or steady it on slippery ground. Its tail, long and muscular, counterbalanced its front half and served as a rudder when it waded into deeper water. It didn't swim often, but when it did, it likely moved with surprising grace, a great, quiet shape gliding through flooded forests, head held above the current, nostrils flaring in the warm air. Its skin, if we could see it, might have been mottled green and brown, patterned like sunlight through leaves, perfect camouflage for the dappled world it inhabited. When it stood still among the reeds, you might mistake it for a hillock or a fallen tree, until it blinked. Despite its size, Aranosaurus was a gentle creature by nature. It had no claws for fighting, no armor, no horns. Its defense was its herd and its vigilance. Its eyes, large and forward-facing, gave it a broad view of the horizon. Even while chewing lazily, it never truly relaxed. Every few moments the head would lift, ears twitching, scanning the wind. And yet, for all its caution, there must have been joy in its world too. Imagine the mornings after the floodwaters receded, when the ground was damp and cool and new shoots were everywhere. The herds would spread out, their low calls echoing across the plain, a soft chorus of life. The young ones, smaller and still unsteady, would chase each other through the shallows, splashing and snorting, their feet sending ripples through the reflected sky. In those moments, the Cretaceous didn't seem dangerous or strange. It was peaceful. It was home. Migration was more than movement. It was rhythm. Aranosaurus lived in time with the planet, a living metronome to the Earth's seasonal heartbeat. When the monsoon clouds gathered, they followed the rain. When the dry season came, they followed the green northward. The pattern never broke, not for generations. Each year was a great circle of life and return, as predictable as the river's rise and fall. When the dry season reached its height, the herds huddled in the last remaining wetlands, their numbers thinning as food grew scarce. They endured, waiting for the skies to open again. Then, when the first drops fell and the wind changed, they would begin their journey back, a pilgrimage written in mud and muscle. The earth of the Cretaceous was loud and crowded, but Aranosaurus moved through it with a kind of quiet dignity. It didn't roar, didn't stampede, didn't need spectacle. It simply was an herbivorous miracle in a time of giants. Its survival depended not on strength, but on cooperation, awareness, and the wisdom of motion. It knew that the floodplain always returned, that the rain always fell again, that the journey never truly ended. In the shimmering heat of midday, the herds would rest. They gathered under the shade of trees, sides heaving slowly, tails flicking away insects. The air smelled of wet earth and vegetation. The sound of chewing filled the silence like rain on leaves, steady, rhythmic, comforting. One could almost imagine the earth itself smiling, whispering softly, "Eat, my children." There's more where that came from. When the wind cooled in the evening, the herds would rise again, ready to move. The fading light caught their sails, turning them to sheets of copper and gold. Their footsteps drummed softly in the mud. Ahead of them stretched another 100 miles of green. Behind them the river sighed, carrying the memories of their passage downstream. The fossils of Aranosaurus tell us much. The shape of its bones, the placement of its spines, the structure of its teeth. But the fossils cannot capture its grace, its patience, or its presence. Those things belong to imagination, to the mind's eye that can still see them moving through the haze of deep time. Close your eyes and listen. Can you hear it? The low rustle of leaves as a herd moves through waist-high ferns. The splash of a heavy foot in shallow water. The soft grunt of breath as a great head lowers to feed. The whisper of rain returning to the plains. That is the song of Aranosaurus, the melody of movement and memory, of green returning after grey, of life trusting the seasons to keep their promise. In the end, these herbivorous giants were not merely survivors of their world. They were its gardeners, its stewards, its travellers. They carried the future of the land in their bellies and on their feet, spreading seeds with every step, keeping the plains alive. If the Cretaceous had a heartbeat, it wasn't in the roar of predators or the crash of storms. It was in the slow, steady rhythm of Aranosaurus herds walking beneath the rain. And perhaps somewhere deep within the earth that still remembers them, that rhythm continues. A faint pulse beneath our feet, whispering in the language of mud and time. Walk on, the floods will come again. The air above the Cretaceous rivers shimmered with heat and mist, the horizon trembling under the heavy breath of monsoon winds. Below, the water carried the reflection of clouds, tangled trees, and ancient light. And high above that living mirror, shadows glided in circles, elegant, patient, and impossibly old. They were the pterosaurs, the masters of the Cretaceous sky. Their wings stitched the air like calligraphy, their cries echoed like the sea meeting stone, and their shapes, all sail and skeleton, seemed made not of flesh, but of wind itself. Among them soared Alencar, one of the most striking of the desert's forgotten aviators. With a wingspan stretching 4 to 6 meters, it ruled the air not with brute power, but with grace. It wasn't a bird, not even close. It was a distant cousin, a reptile that had taken to the sky long before feathers had figured out how to fly. Alencar belonged to an ancient dynasty that had learned the language of the wind when most of Earth's creatures still clung to the ground. Imagine it, a creature taller than a man when standing, but so light that a single leap could send it skyward. Its bones were hollow and paper-thin, yet strong as steel tubes, built for flight efficiency beyond imagination. Its wings, vast, membranous sheets of skin, stretched from elongated fingers, caught the air like sails on an invisible sea. When Alencar spread them, the sunlight shone through faintly, revealing the lacework of veins beneath, like stained glass carved by evolution. It didn't flap constantly like a bird. That would be wasteful in the hot, thick air of the Cretaceous floodplain. Instead, it soared, rising on the warm updrafts that spiraled off the river's surface, drifting effortlessly for minutes, even hours, without a single wing beat. The monsoon winds were its highway, the humid thermals were its elevators. When the storms gathered, it rode the air like a kite between worlds, one foot in the clouds, the other in the reflection below. Alencar's head was long and narrow, shaped like a spear, with a beak that seemed to have been sharpened by intention. No teeth lined that beak, just smooth, cutting edges, perfect for snatching prey from the water's surface. A quick dip, a flash of sunlight, and another meal vanished into the sky. It was a hunter of the in-between places. Not quite sky, not quite river, but the fleeting space where reflection met motion. Its eyes were large and forward-facing, adapted for spotting the faintest ripple or flicker of movement below. A fish breaking the surface, a dragonfly caught in the wind. Alencar saw it all. Its brain, surprisingly advanced for its time, could process airspeed, wind direction, and distance to prey in a heartbeat. To live in the sky required calculation, the kind that no ground-bound creature could imagine. When it flew, it was poetry in motion, wings tilting, body banking, tail twitching to adjust to invisible currents. You could almost hear the soft whisper of the membranes catching air, the steady rhythm of its passage overhead. From the ground it would have looked effortless, a quiet silhouette sliding across the sun, tracing spirals no artist could ever match. But for all its elegance, flight in the Cretaceous wasn't easy. The monsoon season made the air unpredictable. Sudden gusts could toss even the most skilled flyer off course. Torrential rain blurred vision, lightning split the sky in violent flashes. Yet Alencar and its kin were built for chaos. Their long, tapering wings could flex and adjust mid-air, bending like living sails to absorb shock. Their strong shoulder joints acted as hinges, letting them fold and maneuver in turbulence with uncanny precision. And when the storms passed, when the clouds broke and sunlight spilled across the floodplain, the sky became their playground again. Alencar would rise on the returning thermals, circling lazily, scanning the rivers that wound like silver serpents below. It didn't just hunt, it observed. Its world was both vast and detailed. Each glint of water, each shadow of tree, a clue in the endless puzzle of survival. Landing was its only clumsy moment. With wings longer than a car and legs built for takeoff, not strolling, Alencar's approach to the ground must have been a performance. It would tilt its body, angle its wings just so, and descend with exaggerated caution. The long beak struck forward, then up, as its hind feet found the mud. A few awkward steps, a rustle of folded wings, and it was earthbound again. A bird-like silhouette that wasn't really a bird at all. On the ground it looked both majestic and absurd. Standing upright, its head towered 2 meters high, the wings folded neatly against its sides, like a giant cloak. Its neck, long and sinuous, swayed slightly as it scanned its surroundings. The beak glinted in the light, curved subtly downward, ready to pluck at anything edible. It wasn't a walker by choice. The ground was too crowded, too unpredictable, but when resting or nesting, Alenka would find patches of dry sand between floodwaters, perhaps perched near fallen logs or rocky outcrops, waiting for the wind to call it back into the air. Its diet was flexible and clever. While it specialized in snatching small fish from the surface, it likely feasted on whatever the rivers offered: stranded amphibians, crustaceans, perhaps even swarms of insects that rose in shimmering clouds over the deltas. Its beak worked like a pair of precise tongs, quick and delicate. Some scientists even suggest that it could probe soft mud for hidden morsels, using its narrow jaw like a forceps. If food moved, Alenka found a way to make it dinner. To survive in the Cretaceous Sahara, one had to adapt to rhythm: wet and dry, feast and famine, sky calm and sky furious. Alenka's life was a constant negotiation with the weather. When the floods came and the rivers spread wide, the abundance of prey drew it back again and again. But as the dry season took hold and the waters retreated into narrow channels, it would move, gliding along ancient wind corridors, following the scent of rain and humidity across vast distances. Migration for these winged nomads wasn't a journey, it was a lifestyle. Somewhere between the dust and the clouds, Alenka became a symbol of persistence. It lived in a world where water ruled everything: carving, flooding, feeding, yet it mastered the one element that stayed free: the air. It had no need to run or swim. Its horizon was infinite. Its wings, if seen up close, were a marvel of anatomy. The main structure stretched from an elongated fourth finger. Imagine one finger extending the length of your entire arm. Thin membranes of skin, muscle and fiber stretched between that and the body, reinforced by slender rods of cartilage. The result was a living kite that could twist, flex and glide with unmatched efficiency. Tiny muscles along the edges of the wing adjusted tension mid-flight, allowing Alenka to steer with micro-movements invisible to the eye. The texture of those wings was leathery and thin, but not fragile. They were living tissue, filled with blood vessels that kept them warm and responsive. If you could touch one, though it's not advisable, it would feel surprisingly warm, like the surface of a hand under sunlight. They healed quickly too. Life in the air demanded resilience. Its crest, that elegant blade rising from the back of its head, likely added both balance and beauty. Some paleontologists believe it helped with steering, others that it acted as a display, perhaps even glowing faintly under the Cretaceous sun with blood rushing through thin membranes. Picture that, a flash of crimson or gold slicing through the blue, a signal to others that the skies were claimed. And yet, for all its brilliance, Alenka's life was probably quiet. It didn't need to shout. Its call, if it had one, was likely a series of low, croaking barks, more practical than beautiful, carried by the wind across the wetlands. Its days were spent gliding, feeding and resting. Its nights spent roosting under stars older than imagination. When it slept, perhaps it tucked its beak under one wing, standing on one leg like modern herons. The world would darken around it, the rivers glowing faintly with reflected starlight, the wind whispering through the reeds. Somewhere in the distance, thunder might roll, but Alenka would stay unmoved, its wings folded tight, dreaming of the next morning's lift. The dawn skies of the Cretaceous Sahara must have been breathtaking. The air, still cool, shimmered with the first thermals of the day. One by one, the pterosaurs would stir, stretch their wings, and leap into the rising air. For a moment the world was full of motion, hundreds of wings unfurling at once, catching the sunlight like golden sails. The floodplain below glistened, alive with reflection. Above it, the sky belonged to them alone. There was no competition, no crowding. The air was endless, and each current could carry a different traveller. Alenka and its kin likely flew in loose patterns, spread across the horizon, gliding in silence. Occasionally one would dip low, skim the surface, snatch a gleaming fish, and climb again. A simple, perfect act, repeated since dawn. Its fossils, found today in the sands of the Sahara, are fragile, hollow bones turned to stone, wing joints preserved like delicate hinges. But those bones tell us of a creature that refused to be confined. It lived on the edges of worlds, between air and water, storm and calm, past and forever. The river might have belonged to larger, louder beasts, but the sky was Alenka's alone. It was not the strongest or the fiercest, but it was the most free. It moved where the wind moved, ate where the rain fell, and slept under the endless, cloud-drifted ceiling of its world. Perhaps if you close your eyes and listen to the whisper of wind through trees, you can still hear it, the faint rush of ancient wings, circling above a vanished river. The sound is light, almost nothing, yet infinite, the echo of a creature that learned, long before us, how to trust the sky. If the earth could speak to Alenka, it might have said, "Go on, the air is yours." And Alenka, wings outstretched, might have replied without words, simply rising higher and higher until even the river's reflection could no longer hold it. There are sounds that belong to living worlds, the sigh of leaves in wind, the soft hiss of rain through canopy, the slow breathing of the earth through green. If the rivers of the Cretaceous Sahara had a voice, it would not have been the roar of predators or the splash of fish. It would have been the whisper of ferns, the rustle of leaves too old for names, the endless exhale of photosynthesis, quiet, tireless and essential. Before flowers, before grass, before forests learned to bloom and colour, there were ferns. They were the planet's first architects, building the blueprint for shade and air. In the Cretaceous, they did far more than decorate the floodplains. They built them. They stitched the land together, binding the shifting soils, holding the roots of a living world that pulsed with heat and water. Imagine stepping into one of those ancient groves. The air is thick and wet, heavy with the scent of vegetation and damp earth. Sunlight filters down in broken shards, through layers of feathery green, each frond unfurling in perfect spirals. Delicate as lace yet strong as memory, the trunks of the larger ferns rise waist-high, then taller, until they become living columns crowned with arching leaves. Around them, smaller ferns carpet the floor in endless repetition, fractal patterns of life, each one a reflection of the one before it. The ground squishes beneath your feet. It isn't soil in the modern sense, but a mosaic of decomposing plants, damp and fragrant, feeding the roots above. Tiny droplets cling to the underside of each frond, catching light like dew caught in emerald glass. The forest breathes with you. You exhale carbon dioxide, the gas of life, and the ferns inhale it greedily, transforming it into oxygen, releasing it back into the air as though returning a favor. It is a quiet exchange that has lasted for hundreds of millions of years. These Cretaceous fern forests were the lungs of the floodplain. When the rivers swelled and flooded, drowning the lowlands, it was the ferns that held fast. Their dense mats of roots and stems stabilized the banks, keeping the fertile soil from washing away. When the waters receded, they sprouted again with astonishing speed, reclaiming the bare mud before erosion could steal it. Ferns were the engineers of the ecosystem, soft to the touch, but strong enough to hold an entire landscape together. And they were generous. Their leaves shaded the ground, keeping it cool and moist. Their decaying fronds enriched the mud with nutrients. They were a self-sustaining miracle, creating the very conditions that allowed other plants and eventually flowers to rise. The climate of the Cretaceous Sahara was warm, humid, and rich in carbon dioxide, paradise for plants that loved moisture and sunlight. With no frost to threaten them, ferns grew in layers. Ground ferns spreading like carpets, tree ferns forming mid-level canopies, and towering cycads and conifers rising above like the vaulted ceiling of a living cathedral. The result was a forest of impossible depth and softness, an ocean of green through which the light trickled like underwater sunlight. And somewhere among the ferns, the first flowers began to appear. Small, shy things at first, white or yellow blooms peeking out from the greenery, their petals simple but startlingly new. Until this moment in Earth's history, plants had reproduced mostly through spores or cones, but these newcomers, the angiosperms, had discovered a new trick: attraction. They lured pollinators with scent and color, though the concept of beauty had no meaning yet. Evolution doesn't design for admiration, it designs for efficiency. Still, beauty came along anyway, as if the planet, growing confident in its own warmth, decided to experiment with artistry. The arrival of flowers changed everything. The air grew fragrant, the landscape gained splashes of color, tiny flares of brightness against the fern's green. They may not have dominated yet, but they were persistent. Each bloom meant seeds, and each seed meant a new kind of future. Slowly, subtly, the Cretaceous world began to hum with this quiet revolution. But for now, the ferns still ruled. Their fronds stretched for meters, their spores drifted like invisible dust on the wind. When the monsoon rains came, they bowed under the deluge, then rose again, rinsed and renewed. Some reached shoulder height, others towered like trees, their trunks patterned with scars from fallen leaves, a memory of growth, a biography written in spirals. Their textures were ancient, not smooth like modern leaves, but rough and waxy, built to survive heat and damp in equal measure. The veins beneath the surface carried water in perfect symmetry, a living architecture, older than most continents. They were the green machines of deep time, capturing sunlight and turning it into everything that breathed. If you listen carefully, you could almost hear the chemistry at work, the soft hiss of gas exchange, the molecular murmuring of photosynthesis. Each frond a solar panel, each leaf a lung. Together they filled the Cretaceous air with oxygen, making the world not just livable, but lush. The fern forest was also a world of shade and silence. Beneath the canopy, the air was cooler, almost still. Moisture clung to every surface, from the undersides of leaves to the moss-covered logs. The riverbanks, lined with roots and stems, became natural filters. When the floods receded, the ferns trapped sediment and purified the runoff, keeping the waters clear and nutrient-rich. They didn't move, they didn't hunt, and yet, through their stillness, they held power. They created the stage upon which everything else unfolded. Without them, there would have been no stability, only chaos, floods, and bare ground. The fern's true genius lay not in competition, but in cooperation with the land itself. The first flowering shrubs grew timidly among them, learning the art of light. They reached upward through the fern canopy, stretching toward the sun, and in doing so changed the vertical structure of the forest forever. The ferns didn't seem to mind. They simply filled the gaps, content in their ancient rhythm of unfurl, grow, decay, repeat. To walk through such a forest would have been a sensory experience beyond the modern imagination. The air was thick with humidity, fragrant with sap and decay. Sunbeams slanted through the canopy, turning motes of dust and spores into drifting galaxies. Everywhere you looked, green layer upon layer of it, each shade slightly different, from emerald to olive to deep jungle black. The soundscape, too, was alive, the soft patter of rain on fronds, the sigh of wind moving through leaves, the trickle of water through roots. It was a world that didn't shout, it whispered, a place where life spoke in quiet repetition, where survival meant patience, not speed. The fern's reproduction was a marvel of simplicity and persistence. They didn't rely on flowers or fruit, but on spores, tiny dust-like particles that rode the wind like invisible travelers. When the conditions were right, moisture, warmth, a soft patch of soil, the spores germinated into tiny heart-shaped gametophytes, delicate green forms that would eventually give rise to new ferns. Each one was a self-contained miracle, a miniature forest waiting to happen. This cycle was ancient, stretching back hundreds of millions of years, older than the first trees, older than bones, and yet it still worked beautifully. The Cretaceous did not demand innovation from the ferns. It simply rewarded endurance. In many ways, the fern forest was the quiet hero of its world. While other forms of life grew dramatic, wings, teeth, sails, scales, the plants just kept breathing. Their work was invisible but absolute. Every exhaled puff of oxygen, every rooted clump of soil, every shade they offered to the ground below, sustained the balance of the ecosystem. Without them, the rivers would have flooded unchecked, the air would have thinned, and the soil would have washed away. Their service to the planet was humble and infinite. They gave without asking, repaired without notice, and endured without complaint. They were, in the most literal sense, the lungs and heart of the Cretaceous Sahara, quiet, green, unstoppable. As the earth's seasons cycled and the rivers rose and fell, the ferns followed the rhythm. When the floods came, they bent but didn't break. When the waters withdrew, they rose again, brushing off mud, shaking out spores, continuing the work of breathing. Each generation, layered upon the last, building soil, deepening roots, expanding the green. Theirs was a slow eternity, a life lived not in moments but in centuries of sunlight. And among their fronds, the first flowers continued their quiet rebellion. They learned colour, they learned fragrance. They began to paint the forest in faint strokes of yellow, red, and violet. You could almost imagine the ferns looking down at these newcomers, bemused, perhaps a little proud, like elders watching children discover art for the first time. If you could have stood there, ankle deep in the spongy forest floor, surrounded by the steady rustle of leaves, you might have felt the pulse of the planet itself, the calm rhythm of chlorophyll at work, the soundless heartbeat of life creating air from sunlight. The forest would have felt alive, not in movement, but in presence. And perhaps the earth, watching its green children flourish, might have whispered softly, "Grow." The ferns would have listened as they always did, and in their listening they would have answered, not with words, but with leaves unfurling toward the light, with roots gripping soil, with oxygen spilling gently into the air. They didn't need applause. They were the applause, the standing ovation of life itself. So the next time you pass a fern today, in a shaded park or the corner of your garden, remember its ancestors. They were the builders of the first forests, the steady breath of a world still learning how to live. They were the lungs of the Cretaceous, soft, green, eternal. And if you listen closely, you might still hear them, faint but certain, whispering the same phrase they've whispered since the dawn of time: grow and keep the world alive. The Sahara seems eternal now. Endless dunes, shimmering horizons, silence so deep it hums, but beneath that silence lies another world, buried under layers of time and dust. Every grain of sand hides a secret, every stone a memory. You can walk for hours and see nothing but emptiness. And yet, just below your feet, the bones of an ancient river still breathe. For millions of years, this desert was not a desert at all. It was a landscape alive with water, forests, and motion. When that world vanished, it didn't disappear completely. It sank, swallowed by time, sealed by sand, and left to dream in stone. And now, piece by piece, it is speaking again. The first whisper came as bones, heavy bones, strange bones, long, curved, and ancient beyond imagining. In the early 20th century, explorers and paleontologists journeyed into the North African deserts, armed with notebooks, shovels, and a kind of feverish curiosity. Among them was a man named Ernst Stromer, a German scientist who in 1912 found something that didn't fit any known pattern of life. The bones were massive, yet hollow. The teeth were conical, like a crocodile's. The vertebrae were tall, each one sprouting a blade-like spine. He had found the remains of Spinosaurus, the spined lizard, a creature that seemed too bizarre to be real. Those bones told a story of a river giant, a predator that ruled water instead of land. Stromer carefully packed and shipped them to Munich, where they were displayed in a museum, studied and sketched and puzzled over. For a while they stood as proof that the Sahara had once been alive, that monsters of unimaginable size had swum where only wind now moved. And then one night in 1944, during World War II, the museum was bombed. Fire consumed the hall. The skeleton, along with countless other fossils, turned to ash. All that remained were Stromer's notes and photographs, and the ache of something lost forever. It's one of science's great heartbreaks. The bones of a river king reduced to smoke. But the earth is generous in strange ways. Even as those fossils were destroyed, more waited, still buried beneath the dunes of North Africa, silent and patient as always. Decades passed. The world moved on, but the Sahara kept its secrets. Then, in the early 2000s, in the deserts of Morocco, new discoveries began to surface. Quite literally, fossil hunters in the Kem beds, a vast stretch of ancient sandstone near the Moroccan-Algerian border, unearthed bones that looked familiar, long vertebrae, conical teeth, dense, heavy limbs. The whispers grew louder. The Sahara was speaking again. What these bones revealed was astonishing. Not a single skeleton, but an entire ecosystem entombed in rock. Spinosaurus bones mingled with fossilized fish scales, crocodilian armor plates, and petrified river sediments. There were impressions of roots, the ghosts of ancient plants that once lined the floodplains. You could see in cross-section the layers of time, the silt of ancient floods, hardened into rock, each band a record of a river's rise and fall. Among these layers, fish scales gleamed like tiny coins, their enamel still catching light after 100 million years. Some belonged to fish as large as boats, others to small species that darted through the shallows. The fossils were so well preserved that scientists could still see the fine ridges where muscle met bone. It was as if the water had only just receded. Elsewhere, they found root traces, delicate filigrees of stone where once there had been living plants. Each root had drawn water from the same rivers that carried the bones, and when the floods came, the silt filled those spaces and solidified, preserving even the memory of growth. These root fossils are some of the most haunting of all. The shape of life without the life itself, the echo of something soft turned eternal. And then there were the bones of creatures too fragmentary to name. Bones polished by time, worn smooth by sand. They tell stories we cannot yet translate. The desert keeps its secrets well. It only allows glimpses, never full confessions. Every fossil found is both an answer and a question. If you could stand there today, in the heat of the Moroccan desert, under the same sun that once shone on those rivers, you might see paleontologists crouched low over the ground, brushing its stone with the tenderness of someone uncovering a heartbeat. Each flake of rock, each glint of enamel could be a clue. Sometimes, what looks like an ordinary pebble turns out to be a fragment of history, a vertebra, a tooth, a shard of jaw. The work is slow, delicate, and deeply humbling. Fossils are not treasures to be dug up and displayed. They are time capsules, each one a message written in the Earth's own handwriting. When you touch a fossil, you are not just touching stone, you are touching time itself, compacted into the shape of memory. The Moroccan discoveries changed everything. They revealed that the Sahara's heart still holds rivers, not of water, but of stone. Fossilized channels, ancient deltas frozen mid-flow, where every grain of sand once carried life. The sediments themselves tell stories, ripple marks from long-lost currents, mud cracks from drying banks, the impressions of raindrops hardened into eternity. Imagine rain, real, falling rain, fossilized in stone, the momentary made permanent. From these layers, scientists began to reconstruct the ancient world, a place of endless water and life, where creatures soared, swam, and hunted beneath a humid sky. But the fossils are not just scientific data. They are poetry, written in calcium, inked in iron. They are the Sahara's autobiography, each bone and shell a word in its long, slow language. The Kemkem beds are especially rich in such whispers. They span hundreds of kilometers, and every inch of them once lay beneath the silt of a great river system. Dig there, and you might find a fish tooth gleaming beside the vertebra of a giant reptile, or the scale of a creature long vanished. It's as though the earth in one sudden gesture pressed pause on a moment from the Cretaceous, and then tucked it away, waiting for someone to notice. The bones often emerge half-buried, their surfaces polished by sandstorms. They look almost alive when the sun hits them, ivory gleaming against the red rock. Some are as heavy as iron, others fragile as eggshells. Each one carries clues, the marks of muscle attachments, the grain of growth, even scars of old injuries. The fossils remember pain too, the healed fractures, the bite marks, the weathering of time. In a way, the desert itself has become the curator of this vast, ancient museum. It erases, but it also preserves, the dryness of the Sahara, the absence of rain, the endless sand. All these have conspired to keep the bones intact. Buried deep enough untouched by moisture, they fossilized perfectly, protected by the very heat that would kill anything living today. It's almost as if the desert were an archivist, tucking away the past in neat geological folders. Some are labeled clearly, a Spinosaurus jaw here, a fish scale there, and some are still sealed, waiting for the right pair of hands, the right brush, the right moment. Every discovery in Morocco, Egypt, and Niger adds another chapter to the same story. The Cretaceous Sahara, once forgotten, is becoming legible again, and yet, even now, it refuses to give up everything. Many fossils remain deep underground, unreachable without damaging the surrounding rock. Some are only hinted at by faint impressions, the ghost outlines of bones that dissolved long ago, leaving behind negative space, a kind of stone shadow. If you look closely at those impressions, you might feel something like déjà vu, the sense that the past isn't gone, just buried. The Sahara's fossils are like old photographs with the subjects missing. You can see where they were, you can imagine their faces, but the picture will always be incomplete. Still, the work continues. Teams return each year, braving the sun, the wind, the sheer indifference of the desert, because each fragment matters. A single tooth can redefine an entire species. A shard of bone can rewrite what we thought we knew about evolution. Paleontology is a science of fragments, but every fragment is a revelation. And in a way, each fossil is still alive. Not biologically, but narratively. It carries memory. It changes the way we see the earth. The rivers that dried, the creatures that vanished, they're still speaking, just in a slower tongue. When a paleontologist brushes dust from a bone, they are in a sense listening. If you stand out there among the dunes of Morocco or Algeria, you can feel it. The wind whispers across the sand, low and dry, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear it saying, "Dig here." It's not superstition, it's the earth remembering itself. And when those bones come to light, the long spine of a river predator, the glint of a fish scale, the curve of a root, turned to stone, it feels less like discovery and more like reunion. The fossils aren't new, they've just been waiting for company. It's humbling to think that all of this, every skeleton, every scale, every petrified root, slept beneath the same sun we know today, hidden for 100 million years. The world above them changed entirely, yet below, time stood still. The Sahara turned from jungle to sea, sea to sand, but the bones never left. They just waited, perfectly still, as though keeping the secret until we were ready to ask the right questions. So when you look at a fossil, remember, it's not just a bone, it's a voice. It's the earth speaking through stone, saying, "This is what I was, this is what I remember." And maybe, if the earth could smile, it would add, with a bit of pride and humor, "Be gentle. These are my stories. Don't break them." Because beneath the silence of the desert, under all that heat and wind and endless sand, the ancient rivers are still whispering. And if we keep listening, carefully, respectfully, patiently, they might just finish their story. There was a time when the Sahara breathed, when rivers coiled through its heart like silver threads, when rain fell in rhythmic pulses, and the air smelled of wet soil and fern. But no paradise lasts forever, not even one written in sunlight and green. The world changes always, slowly, imperceptibly at first, and then all at once. It began, as many endings do, with something small, a shift in the air, a change in the rhythm of rain. The monsoon that had once come faithfully each year began to hesitate. Storms arrived later, weaker, shorter. Clouds drifted farther north, carrying their water elsewhere. The heat stayed, but the sky's generosity faltered. The rivers, those ancient lifelines, began to shrink. At first, no one would have noticed. A few dry seasons here and there, a few shallower channels. The land had always known drought and flood in equal measure. But this was different. The dry seasons grew longer. The wet seasons grew unpredictable. The balance began to tilt, and the floodplain that had once pulsed with green began to fade at the edges. Over millions of years, the continents themselves shifted, as if rolling in their sleep. Africa continued its slow drift northward, inch by inch, leaving the humid equator behind. The tectonic plates, patient as mountains, were rearranging the map of the world. The result was subtle but unstoppable. Air currents changed, ocean patterns shifted, and the great tropical rivers of the Cretaceous began to die. The once warm seas that fed the monsoons cooled. The lush, steaming swamps turned to patchy wetlands, then to isolated lakes. The air grew drier, the soil more brittle. Rain still fell, but less often, and when it came, It carved more than it nourished. Floods became disasters instead of blessings, stripping the land bare. The old forests struggled to recover, their roots cracking in the hardening earth. Imagine walking through that fading world. The air would still shimmer with heat, but the soundscape would be changing. Fewer rustles in the undergrowth, fewer songs in the air. The great rivers that had once carried the heartbeat of the ecosystem now murmured weakly through deep, dusty beds. Their banks, once lined with ferns and flowering shrubs, were giving way to scrub and sand. The Cretaceous Sahara, once green and generous, was beginning its long transformation into silence. It wasn't a single event, no great catastrophe or flash of apocalypse. It was a slow unraveling, a quiet collapse stretched over ages, like a candle burning down, the world dimmed by degrees. Each year a little less rain, a little more dust, each generation a little fewer voices in the chorus of life. The rivers that had once connected the land began to fragment into pools, then ponds, then nothing. The delta plains, once rich and overflowing, dried and cracked, their sediments baking under an unrelenting sun. The air filled with dust storms that rolled across the horizon like ghosts of the monsoon that once was. And beneath that bright, merciless sky, the life that had thrived there, plants, fish, reptiles, creatures of air and water, began to falter. Some moved on, following the receding moisture northward or westward. Others simply disappeared, unable to adapt to a land that no longer remembered rain. Extinction did not come with a roar, but with a sigh. The great river system, once the spine of a living continent, had become its skeleton. Scientists today can trace this slow death in the rocks. Layers that once recorded floods now show evidence of drought, deep cracks in clay, wind-blown sand trapped between silt deposits, the chemical fingerprints of evaporation. Even without fossils, the earth itself keeps the minutes of its own undoing. You can read them like the pages of a diary written in dust. It wasn't just the drying that changed everything. It was the shifting of the continents that sealed the fate. As Africa moved north, its collision course with Eurasia began to alter the global balance of air and water. The great inland seas withdrew. Ocean circulation changed. The winds that once brought monsoons to the heart of Africa began to fail. For millions of years, the land hung in a strange limbo. Not yet desert, but no longer rainforest. Grass hadn't yet evolved to take over, so the ground grew patchy and barren. Pockets of green clung to the lowlands, islands of life in a widening sea of dust. Every season, the green retreated a little farther. You can almost imagine the last wet year, the final generous monsoon, the rivers swollen again, briefly as if the world were trying to remember itself. The ferns rising in triumph for one last time, the air thick with the scent of mud and pollen, and then the next year, less rain, the next, even less, until one day the rain simply didn't come. The sun took over completely. It burned through what was left, turning the soil pale and hard. Without the roots to hold it, the ground began to lift and move. Dust became dunes, dunes became mountains. The rivers left their marks like scars, ancient channels etched into stone, now empty but still graceful in their curves. The Sahara as we know it began to take shape, born not in violence but in slow, inevitable change. This was not failure, not in the sense of tragedy. The earth doesn't mourn in the way we do. To it, every ending is just another phase of becoming. The rivers didn't die, they transformed. The forests didn't vanish, they fed the soil for the desert to come. Even extinction is a kind of renewal, energy passed from one form to another, memory stored in minerals. But to the creatures that lived there, the change must have been devastating. The heat unrelenting, the water scarce, the horizon a glare of light so strong it seemed to hum. The ground cracked open like old pottery, and the air shimmered with mirage. The songs of the Cretaceous rivers faded into the long, slow wind. Yet, even as life withdrew, the land remembered. Beneath the layers of new sand, the old riverbeds remained, buried but intact, their curves still traceable, their sediment still layered like pages in a story. Each grain of sand, once part of a riverbank, still carries the fingerprint of water. The Sahara's dryness paradoxically preserved its wet past. If you were to dig deep enough, far beneath the dunes that stretch endlessly across modern North Africa, you would find those riverbeds frozen in place, the cross-sections of channels and floodplains that have slept for nearly 100 million years, the bones of rivers, the ghosts of deltas, the architecture of a vanished world. The shift wasn't limited to Africa, of course. Across the globe, the Cretaceous warmth was fading. The Earth's internal rhythms, plate tectonics, volcanic cycles, orbital wobbles, were slowly dialing down the great greenhouse that had defined the age. Sea levels began to fall, global temperatures dropped by a few degrees, but that was enough to redraw entire continents. The lush tropics that had once stretched unbroken from pole to pole began to fragment in Africa. The result was final. The monsoon system that had once drenched the continent retreated, and the great rivers dried completely. The delta regions turned to sand flats. The wetlands vanished. The Sahara's birth was complete, a cradle of life transformed into a monument of stillness. There's a certain irony in it, isn't there? The same sunlight that once fed the forests now bakes the sand. The same wind that once carried rain now carries dust. What was once motion has become memory, and yet there's something strangely peaceful about it too. The desert, in its silence, still holds the shape of its past. The dunes follow the curves of old riverbeds. The stones shimmer where water once flowed. If you stand at dawn on a high ridge in the Sahara and look out across the endless waves of sand, you can almost see it. The faint shimmer of ancient rivers still running just beneath the surface, invisible but not gone. The earth, ever patient, never forgets. It may change its clothes green to gold, water to dust, but it keeps the old patterns close, folded neatly beneath the new. The Cretaceous Sahara's collapse wasn't the end of the story. It was simply a turning of the page. One world fading so another could emerge. The river plains hardened into desert plateaus. The wetlands turned to basins. The lakes dried into salt flats that still glint under the modern sun. Every gust of wind that lifts a handful of sand today carries with it a whisper from that time. Tiny grains of stone that were once river mud, once life, once breath. It's tempting to feel sorrow for that lost world, to imagine the tragedy of its fading. But perhaps the earth would laugh softly at that, not in cruelty but in wisdom. Change is its oldest trick, its favourite melody. Worlds rise, worlds fall, and life keeps finding new ways to fill the silence. If the Sahara could speak, it might say, "Don't grieve, I'm still here. I've just changed shape." And if you listen carefully, maybe you can still hear the faint murmur of the old rivers beneath your feet, buried but eternal, humming softly through the sand. They are not gone, merely dreaming. The desert is quiet now, yes, but it is not empty. It is full of memory, and the memory is alive. If the ancient rivers of the Cretaceous Sahara could speak, they might sigh and say, "We've seen this before." The story of their fading, the long, slow drying of a once lush world, feels uncomfortably familiar. The difference is only in the pace. Where the Cretaceous changed over millions of years, our world shifts over decades. The planet turns faster now, and the echo of those vanished waterways can already be heard in our own. Across the Earth today, rivers are thinning, shrinking, or vanishing altogether. The Colorado River, once a roaring artery of the American West, now trickles uncertainly toward the sea, its waters drained by farms, cities, and thirst. The Yangtze, the longest river in Asia, has run so low in recent summers that ancient temples long submerged now rise from its exposed bed like ghosts of warning. In the shadow of dams, droughts, and rising heat, these rivers tell a modern version of the Sahara's story, how life depends on water, and how quickly life changes when that water disappears. We are living, in essence, in another age of shifting climates, not caused by tectonic drift this time, but by our own restless hands. We burn, we build, we drain, we consume, and the atmosphere responds quietly at first. Then all at once, heat rises, rain falters, patterns bend. It is an old rhythm repeating, but faster, louder, and perhaps less forgiving. The Cretaceous Sahara reminds us that ecosystems do not collapse in explosions. They fade. There are no alarms, no single day when the world ends. Instead, the signs appear like whispers: fewer rains, thinner forests, a little less green each year. The end comes quietly, disguised as ordinary change. By the time you notice, the river has already forgotten how to flow. Today, we are surrounded by those whispers: coral reefs bleaching one summer, wetlands vanishing another, species declining not with drama, but with exhaustion. Scientists call it a loss of biodiversity. The Earth might call it losing its breath. It's tempting to think that nature is resilient, that it always bounces back. And to some extent, that's true. The planet has survived ice ages, impacts, supervolcanoes. It knows how to recover. But recovery takes time, and time is the one thing we never seem to have. What took millions of years to rebuild after the Cretaceous collapse may not be possible on human timescales. We live too fast. Our footprints are too deep. Consider this: the Sahara's rivers vanished because the rains moved away, drawn off by shifting winds and continents. Today, our actions, emissions, deforestation, industry, shift the winds themselves. We are not passengers in this story. We are authors, rewriting the climate one molecule at a time. The air we alter, the oceans we warm, the rivers we dam, all of it builds toward patterns we cannot fully predict. The Colorado River, for instance, now ends before it reaches the sea, strangled by drought and demand. The Yangtze's fish populations have collapsed. In parts of Africa, the once mighty Niger River faces irregular floods and prolonged dry seasons. Even the Amazon, that green cathedral of life, is showing signs of stress fires, deforestation and heat, combining to make it breathe unevenly. These are not isolated stories, they are verses of the same old song. And yet, we often tell ourselves that modern technology will save us, that dams, desalination or cloud seeding will solve it. But the Cretaceous world offers a humbler perspective. When the climate tips too far, when water patterns shift beyond their natural bounds, no invention can argue with physics. The Earth is not cruel, but it is consistent. The Cretaceous ecosystem, lush, vibrant, teeming, didn't fall apart because one species did something wrong. It fell apart because the conditions that sustained it changed. The air dried, the water receded, the living web unraveled. Slowly, quietly, inevitably. It's the same process that now plays out across our headlines, only this time we are not just observers, we are participants. It's almost poetic in a bittersweet way that the very species capable of understanding climate history is also the one accelerating it. We know more about the chemistry of rain and the behavior of carbon dioxide than any creatures before us. We can simulate ancient climates, read the isotopes of ice cores, and model the movement of air across the globe. And yet, despite all this wisdom, our rivers are drying anyway. Knowledge alone doesn't stop thirst. Scientists often say the Cretaceous was a greenhouse world, warmer, wetter, richer in carbon. The Earth was lush, but unstable. When the balance tipped, the abundance vanished. Our age, by contrast, is becoming a hothouse world, one built not by tectonics, but by combustion. We are replaying an ancient drama, but we've skipped the slow act and jumped straight to the climax. And as the temperature climbs, the consequences ripple outward, not just through ecosystems, but through societies. Water, after all, is never just about life, it's about power. History itself has always followed rivers. Civilizations rise beside them and fall when they fail. Already, across the world, we see the first ripples of conflict. Nations arguing over shrinking water supplies, farmers competing with cities, drought forcing migration. In this sense, the lessons of the Cretaceous are not distant, they are immediate. When a river dies, it doesn't just take its fish or its reeds, it takes the stability of everything that depended on it. The Cretaceous floodplains were the backbone of an entire world. When they dried, the world itself rearranged. We may not have Spinosaurus or fern forests anymore, but we have our own versions of dependence, power grids, crops, economies, cities, and all of them rely, in one way or another, on water. It's humbling to realize that, for all our satellites and science, our fate still depends on something as simple as rain. The Cretaceous world learned that lesson slowly. We are learning it quickly. Each dry river, Each shrinking lake is a reminder that ecosystems are both vast and fragile. Vast enough to sustain life for millions of years, but fragile enough to falter when balance breaks. And when they falter, the silence comes. It doesn't come with fire or noise, but with absence. No birds, no insects, no flow, just stillness. The Cretaceous Sahara reached that point long ago. The modern world stands at its edge now, listening to the same quiet that once followed the last monsoon. Still, the earth has a sense of humor about these things. You can almost hear it chuckling softly. I've seen warmer. I've seen drier. You'll adapt or you won't. I'll be fine. It's true. The planet will endure, no matter what happens. What's uncertain is whether we will continue to thrive in the version of it we're creating. When paleontologists study the Cretaceous Sahara, they often marvel at how resilient life was. Even during its decline, pockets of green persisted long after the main rivers vanished. Microclimates sheltered fragments of the old ecosystem, but those fragments never rebuilt the whole. Once the pattern was lost, it never returned. That's the deeper lesson. Not of despair, but of humility. Ecosystems can bend, but only so far. Climate systems can fluctuate, but only within limits. Cross those thresholds, and the feedback loops take over. The world doesn't explode. It adapts, just in ways that no longer include the same balance we once enjoyed. Today we see the same story written in new ink. Glaciers retreating, seas rising, forests turning to savannas, savannas turning to dust. It's not the end of the world, it's a rearrangement of it. But rearrangements come with costs. The Cretaceous Sahara was once a paradise, now it's a desert. Somewhere between those two states lies a warning written in stone. Nothing stable lasts forever. But the humor of it, and the hope perhaps, lies in perspective. The earth doesn't teach with anger, it teaches with time. It doesn't scold, it simply repeats. Balance, it says over and over through droughts and floods, through rivers and sand. Balance, or be replaced. When we look at our own drying rivers, the Colorado, the Yangtze, the Ganges, the Tigris, we are looking at the same message that was once written across the Sahara in vanished waterlines. It's as if the earth, patient and wry, is whispering, "Careful, you're rehearsing my past." And maybe that's why the story of the Cretaceous Sahara matters now more than ever. It reminds us that ecosystems are not permanent. They are delicate agreements between land, water, and sky, and those agreements can be broken without noise. You don't need a meteor or a volcano for collapse. Sometimes all it takes is a little less rain. If the rivers of the past could speak to the rivers of today, they might say something simple: stay full while you can. If the ancient monsoons could address the modern storms, perhaps they'd murmur, remember where you once fell. And if the Sahara itself could send a message through its endless wind, it might whisper, half in jest and half in truth. Fragility isn't failure, it's a reminder to pay attention. Because in the end, the greatest warning from the lost rivers of the Cretaceous is not that they died, but that they died quietly. No trumpets sounded, no disaster announced their passing. They just stopped coming back, and the world kept turning. And somewhere in that quiet, the earth learned and now teaches the simplest of all truths. Life, for all its grandeur, is only ever as strong as its balance with the air and the rain. So, as we watch our rivers thin and our climates shift, perhaps we should listen closely, not for thunder, but for whispers. The whispers of a world that has done this before, patiently, beautifully, and without regret. The Sahara has been many things: a sea, a forest, a riverland, a desert. It will be something else again, someday. But we who live in the small bright moment between floods and droughts would do well to remember the earth always changes, and it always leaves hints first. And if we ignore those hints, well, the planet will simply shrug and carry on. It has all the time in the world. We're the ones on the clock. If the lost rivers of the Cretaceous Sahara could look upon us now, perhaps they would smirk, a dry, sandy sort of smile, and say, "You've got it easier than we did. At least you have plumbing." The ancient world didn't have the luxury of choice. When the monsoon failed, when the rain stopped falling, the rivers simply surrendered to the desert. But we are not Spinosaurus or fern forests. We are builders, thinkers, and at our best, caretakers. We can learn from that silence and decide not to repeat it. The first truth is simple, if a bit humbling. We can't make more water. The same molecules that trickled through the Cretaceous rivers are the ones we drink today. Water is ancient, the most recycled substance on Earth. Every raindrop that falls on your skin has been through 1,000 lives before. Ocean mist, river flow, glacier ice, and perhaps once, long ago, part of a Cretaceous floodplain. What changes is not the amount of water, but where it goes and how we treat it. That's where adaptation begins. Not in invention, but in respect. We can't conjure rain, but we can conserve what we have, recycle what we use, and protect where it flows. Modern science already gives us tools the ancient world never dreamed of. Water recycling, the elegant, unglamorous act of giving water a second life, turns waste into renewal. In cities from Singapore to Los Angeles, purification systems now take used water, clean it to microscopic precision, and send it back into the supply. The technology is dazzlingly simple in spirit. Instead of using water once and discarding it, we invite it back into the cycle. It's the ecological version of good manners. Even small innovations ripple outward. Imagine neighborhoods designed like miniature watersheds, roofs that collect rainwater, gardens that filter it through soil, channels that return it slowly to the ground instead of letting it rush away. A city could breathe like an ecosystem again, with every surface playing its part. And where water is scarce, efficiency becomes art. Drip irrigation, for instance, delivers moisture directly to plant roots, drop by patient drop, minimizing waste. In the deserts of Israel and the farms of California, this quiet technology keeps fields alive with a fraction of the water once required. It's not glamorous. There are no heroic machines, no roaring pumps, just gravity, plastic tubing, and persistence. But in the long arc of survival, persistence has always mattered more than drama. Of course, technology alone won't save our rivers if we forget the living systems that depend on them. The health of water depends on the health of its basin, the forests, wetlands, and soils that cradle it. When those are stripped or poisoned, the rivers lose their ability to heal. Protecting water means protecting the land around it. A river without roots is a vein without a heart. Across the world, scientists and communities are beginning to restore watersheds, replanting trees along riverbanks, rebuilding wetlands that absorb floods, reconnecting channels that were cut off by old dams. It's slow work, and rarely the stuff of headlines, but it's the kind of quiet heroism that keeps ecosystems alive. When a wetland comes back to life, when the reeds return and the water clears, it's as though the earth exhales again. Meanwhile, in the fields and farms that feed us, the next great shift may come from plants themselves. Just as ferns and flowers once adapted to the Cretaceous heat, our crops must now adapt to a warmer, drier world. Agricultural scientists are developing drought-tolerant crops, varieties of wheat, rice and maize bred or engineered to thrive on less water. It's evolution accelerated by necessity, the continuation of a story as old as life itself. Change or wither. These plants aren't miracles, they're lessons in compromise. They remind us that resilience isn't about defying nature, but working with it. A cactus doesn't fight the desert, it learns its rhythm. Likewise, the future of agriculture depends on listening to the land, not conquering it. But beyond science and soil lies something harder to measure, a shift in attitude. We must see water not as a commodity, but as a relationship. It's easy to treat rivers as resources to be used, dammed and diverted. Yet every culture that has survived long enough to thrive in dry lands learned the same truth. You don't own water, you borrow it, and you must return it, clean and alive, for others to use. That sense of stewardship is growing again in many places. In Australia, indigenous water management practices are being reintegrated into modern systems, ancient wisdom that understands how to read landscapes, anticipate floods, and preserve groundwater. In India, communities are reviving traditional stepwells and rain tanks, elegant, local solutions that worked for centuries before industrial infrastructure replaced them. Even in hypermodern nations, new urban designs mimic old wisdom, building green corridors that let water flow naturally through cities rather than forcing it into pipes. These are not nostalgic gestures, they're acts of adaptation. The Cretaceous Sahara did not fail because it was weak. It failed because it could not adapt fast enough to a changing sky. We have the gift of foresight that no fern or river creature ever had. We can read data, model futures, and plan ahead. To waste that ability would be the only true tragedy. Part of adaptation also means knowing when to step back. Some rivers are simply overtapped, drained beyond repair. In such cases, letting nature reclaim space, removing obsolete dams, restoring floodplains can bring astonishing results. In Europe, projects to free long-dammed rivers have led to the return of wetlands, fish migrations, and cleaner water within years. The Earth doesn't hold grudges, it recovers when given the chance. And then there's the human dimension, the one that often complicates everything. Water is life, but it's also politics. Around the globe, countries share rivers that ignore borders. The Nile, the Mekong, the Tigris, the Colorado. Cooperation, not competition, will decide their future. When nations fight over water, everyone loses. When they share it, everyone drinks. It sounds idealistic, but so did flight once, until something grew wings. The challenge is vast, but so is our capacity to respond. We live in an age of global connection, where droughts and floods no longer happen in isolation. A dry year in Asia can shift markets in Europe. A melting glacier in the Andes can affect power in South America. The planet has always been interconnected, but now our awareness has caught up. That awareness, uncomfortable as it may be, is our greatest tool. Climate adaptation isn't just about technology or policy, it's about empathy across scales. Understanding that every drop of water, every patch of soil, every gust of wind participates in the same delicate choreography. When one part falters, the others feel it. The Cretaceous rivers understood that balance instinctively. We have to relearn it intentionally. And let's be honest, it's not all doom and data. There's humor in the challenge too. Humans have a knack for optimism, bordering on stubbornness. We plant trees in deserts, build floating cities, harvest fog from mountains. We make mistakes spectacularly, but we also fix them with creativity. If the Earth is watching, and you get the sense it always is probably amused by our mix of panic and ingenuity. Picture it, a scientist crouched by a dried riverbed, measuring soil moisture with a solar-powered probe, muttering, "Come on, you can do this," as though coaxing the ground back to life. Somewhere deep in the sand, the ghost of a Cretaceous river might chuckle and whisper, "That's the spirit," because that's what this era demands. Not despair, but persistence with humor. The rivers we've lost can't be resurrected, but the rivers we have can be protected. The rain patterns we can't control can still be planned for. The ecosystems that remain can still flourish if we let them breathe. Adaptation, at its heart, is not about fighting change. It's about dancing with it. The Earth has been through cycles of heat and drought before, but never with a partner as self-aware as us. We know what's coming. We know what's at stake. And that means we can choose differently. If we remember the story of the Cretaceous Sahara, the slow fading of a once vibrant world, it's not to mourn it, but to learn from it. The ancient rivers didn't fail because they were cursed. They faded because the climate shifted and nothing stood ready to help them. Now we are the help, the caretakers, the voices that can decide whether tomorrow's deserts will be silent or still singing with the sound of flowing water. We may not control the wind, but we can shape our response. We can recycle, replant, restore, and most importantly, remember. The lesson written in the sand is not all things end, but all things can adapt. If the Earth could whisper advice, perhaps it would sound something like this: protect your rivers, respect your rain. The rest will follow. And maybe, just maybe, if we listen well enough, if we keep the water flowing, if we keep the balance alive, the world will smile softly in return and murmur, "You've learned." Because in the grand conversation between past and present, between river and desert, between loss and renewal, there is still time for one more verse, the one where we choose to keep the rivers alive. And so the story flows full circle, from rivers to desert, from life to silence, from memory to meaning. Long ago, under a sun as warm as ours, the Sahara was not a kingdom of sand, but a cradle of water. Its heart pulsed with great Cretaceous rivers, wide as dreams and deep as time. Along their banks walked giants, hunters with sails on their backs, crocodiles, long as buses, fish clad in armor, and herds of gentle creatures that followed the monsoon's rhythm, like a prayer. Above them, wings of pterosaurs traced silent spirals across the tropical sky, and through it all, the water sang, a steady song of movement, reflection, and life. That song is gone now. The rivers have turned to stone, the forests to dust. What remains are whispers, bones and scales, impressions and roots, memories pressed into rock. They sleep beneath the sands of the Sahara, telling their stories in the quiet language of fossils. Each fragment, each shimmer of ancient enamel, carries the echo of that vanished world, a world that lived, thrived, and in time faded away. It would be easy to call it a tragedy, but the earth doesn't believe in tragedies. It believes in transformation. The rivers of the Cretaceous did not vanish in anger. They changed shape. They became dunes, wind, dust. Another chapter in the long autobiography of our planet. What we see as endings are merely pauses in a much greater rhythm. And yet, the memory of those rivers still matters. It reminds us that life is both strong and fragile, that beauty and balance are not permanent, but earned. The story of the Cretaceous Sahara isn't just about creatures or climate, it's about the patience of the earth and the need for ours. When we find a fossil, a spine curved like a wave, a scale glinting with age, we are not just uncovering bones, we are uncovering a lesson. We are hearing the faint whisper of deep time saying, "This too was once alive, this too was once whole. Take care, for you walk on the same ground." Tim, there's something profoundly tender about that thought, that beneath our feet lies not emptiness but memory, that the sand we step on once held forests, that the air we breathe carries atoms from ancient rain, that the same sunlight shining on our faces once filtered through ferns above a prehistoric river. The world is smaller than it seems, and older than we can ever imagine. The fossils of the Sahara do not shout, they murmur, they tell of abundance, of change, of quiet endings. They remind us that even the mightiest ecosystems can falter when balance slips, and that the line between flourishing and fading is thinner than we think. They remind us too that the earth endures not unscathed but unbroken. We can learn from that resilience. We can listen to those buried rivers and choose differently. We can keep our own waters alive, our forests standing, our skies breathable. We can treat this planet not as a possession but as a conversation, one that began long before us and will continue long after. Because in the end, every drop of water is older than we are. Every gust of wind has travelled through time, and every river, even the dry ones, remembers how to flow. So tonight, as you rest, whether you're curled beneath a blanket or listening under a quilt of stars, imagine it. Close your eyes and picture the Sahara not as a desert, but as it once was, green, alive, full of motion. Picture the rivers winding through the forest, sunlight glittering on their surface like melted gold. Hear the rustle of ferns, the murmur of water against stone. Feel the humidity in the air, the heartbeat of a planet still young and eager. And then, slowly, let that image fade. Watch the rivers sink beneath the sand, the forest dissolve into heat and silence. See the dunes rise, golden and endless. The water is gone, but the shape of its memory remains. Ripples in the rock, curves in the wind, even the desert remembers the rhythm of rain. That is the true gift of the Sahara's fossils, not sorrow, but continuity. They show us that the earth never truly loses anything. It transforms, recycles, renews. Life ends only to begin again in another form. The river that once cradled giants now flows invisibly through the air, through clouds and bloodstreams and dreams. It never really Perhaps that is the earth's oldest whisper, the one that runs beneath every story we tell. Everything flows. So, the next time you stand beside a river, listen carefully. Beneath the chatter of the current, you might hear something softer, a murmur that doesn't belong to this age at all. It might be the echo of those Cretaceous waters, the same molecules that once reflected the wings of Alan Carr, the ripples that touch the feet of our Anasaurus. It might be the voice of time itself saying gently, "Remember me." And when you hear it, that faint ancient rhythm, smile, because you are part of it. The same cycle, the same breath, the same miracle of change. The world is still alive with stories. They lie beneath your feet, shimmer in your drinking water, whisper in the wind that crosses the sea. The Sahara's lost rivers may be buried, but their message flows on. Protect what moves, cherish what breathes, and never forget that even silence once had a song. So, as this story drifts to an end, let the past settle softly around you. Let the Cretaceous rivers flow again, if only in your mind. See them glinting under the sun of deep time, vast, warm, alive. See their reflections stretching across the ages, touching ours. And in that reflection, see yourself, one more traveller in the long journey of the earth, one more listener to its quiet, patient wisdom. If you've enjoyed wandering through this lost world, feel free to share what you've imagined. Tell others about these ancient waters, these rivers that once dreamed beneath the Sahara. Leave a like, or a thought, or simply a breath of wonder. And now, as the last light fades and the old rivers fall silent again, may your own dreams drift gently downstream. Good night, and may the whisper of ancient waters guide you into sleep.